We all know that life can feel like an endless sea, calm one moment, stormy the next. Some nights, it's so quiet you can hear your thoughts echo, and other nights, the waves of worry just won't stop crashing. But somewhere beyond the noise, there's a voice that whispers, "Rest, little one. Jesus shelters you by the shore fire tonight." In today's video, we'll talk about the moment faith first began, the calling by the sea. So let's not waste any time, and let's begin. The fire still glows behind you, its warmth clinging to the cool air. The sea, calm now, carries the scent of something ancient, the kind of silence that holds stories too big for words. Dawn begins to stretch across the horizon, slow and golden, and the voice that once whispered your name now speaks through memory. Long ago, at this same sea, there were fishermen, rough-handed men of few words, men whose lives were measured in tides and nets. Their world was small, simple, filled with the rhythm of cast and pull, hope and disappointment. They were men who knew exhaustion more than revelation, until the day he came walking along their shore. He didn't arrive like a king, no banners, no noise, just the crunch of sand beneath his feet, and the gaze that saw straight through them, past their failures, past their doubt, into something eternal. Simon Peter was mending his net when he stopped beside him. Andrew looked up from the boat, wiping salt from his brow. They didn't know his name yet, but they felt it, that stirring inside, the one that makes the ordinary tremble under the weight of the divine. "Follow me," he said simply, his voice steady as the tide, "and I will make you fishers of men." No persuasion, no promise of glory, just an invitation. Yet it was enough. Something in his tone carried truth, the kind of truth that doesn't need explanation. It simply is. The nets fell, the boats were left behind, and without understanding why, they followed. That's how faith begins, not in cathedrals or miracles, but in the quiet decision to step into uncertainty because a voice told you to. The morning light shimmered across the lake as they walked behind him. The air was cool, and the sand clung to their feet. He led them to the same place they had fished all night, where they had caught nothing but fatigue. "Put out into the deep water," he said, "and let down your nets for a catch." Peter hesitated. His hands were raw, his eyes sunken from sleepless hours. "Master," he muttered, "we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything." The silence that followed was heavy, like the pause between heartbeats. Then Peter sighed, lowering his gaze. "But because you say so, I will let down the nets." They rowed back out, the oars creaking against the water's resistance. The boat rocked gently, the morning light spilling across their faces. When the nets sank beneath the surface, the world held its breath. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, a sudden pull, a violent, impossible tug. The rope strained, the nets bulged. Fish thrashed and flashed like silver fire beneath the surface. The men shouted, laughter mixing with disbelief. The boat tilted dangerously, overflowing with life. "Call the others!" Peter yelled. Another boat rowed up beside them, their friends wide-eyed at the sight. Both boats filled until they nearly sank, the weight of abundance pressing down. And in that moment, Peter's laughter broke. He dropped to his knees amid the chaos, surrounded by fish and salt water, and whispered through trembling lips, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." But Jesus only looked at him with the gentleness of someone who already knew the past, the guilt, the smallness of a man who thought himself unworthy. "Do not be afraid," he said. "From now on, you will catch people." The words settled deeper than any sermon. Fear turned into wonder. The sea, once their master, now bowed before something greater. They brought the boats to shore, the nets spilling over with proof of what faith can do. And there, on that sand, where waves whispered against the world, they left everything behind. The boats, the nets, the safety of the familiar. Behind them the sea went on being the sea, vast, indifferent, eternal. But something inside them had changed. The ordinary had become holy. As they walked beside him, Peter glanced back once more at the shoreline. The boats rocked gently in the distance, as if waving goodbye to the men they used to be. He didn't know what lay ahead. Hunger, storms, miracles, or crosses, but he knew one thing, the call was real. The journey had begun not with thunder or revelation, but with obedience, the smallest yes spoken in trust. The sea shimmered behind them as they followed him into the unknown. Each step a surrender, each heartbeat a prayer. The waves whispered again, low and endless, "Follow me." And as they left the shore, the lesson of obedience began to shape them, quietly, like water shaping stone. The sun rose higher that morning, spilling gold across the shore. The waves rolled in softly, whispering the same rhythm they always had, steady, patient, ancient. Jesus walked ahead of the disciples, his sandals brushing the sand, leaving behind faint footprints that glowed briefly, before the sea reached up and took them away. It was here, along the water's edge, that he began to teach, not with scrolls or grand speeches, but through parables. Each one was a story simple enough for a child to understand, yet deep enough to echo through eternity. "The kingdom of heaven," he said, picking up a small handful of sand and letting it drift through his fingers, "is like this." The grains shimmered in the sunlight before falling back to the earth. Each grain looks the same, yet none are identical. Each one plays its part in forming the shore as, small and fragile as they seem, they endure the waves. So it is with the faithful, small in number but strong in spirit. The disciples listened quietly. Peter's brow furrowed as he tried to make sense of it. Matthew, ever thoughtful, scribbled in the sand, tracing meaning through symbols. Around them the crowd grew. Farmers, mothers, beggars, and scholars all pressed close, drawn not by spectacle, but by the warmth of his words. Jesus continued, gesturing toward a group of children playing nearby. "The kingdom of God belongs to such as these," he said. The children paused, their laughter softening into curiosity, for they do not question before they trust. They do not measure love, they simply receive it. One little boy stepped forward, holding a broken shell. Jesus knelt to meet him, studying it as though it were treasure. "See how this shell is cracked?" he said gently. "It is still part of the sea. Broken things still belong." The crowd fell silent. It wasn't just about shells or sand. It was about them, the fishermen, the outcasts, the weary travellers, all the broken ones who had come seeking something more than miracles. They were looking for meaning. Later that afternoon, as the sun climbed higher, the disciples gathered around him, beneath the shade of a large fig tree. The air was heavy and still. Jesus drew a circle in the sand and began another story. "There was once a farmer," he said, "who went out to sow his seed. Some fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky ground, where it sprang up quickly but withered in the sun. Some fell among thorns, which choked it. But some fell on good soil, and it grew, 30, 60, even 100-fold. The disciples exchanged uncertain glances. "Master," Thomas said hesitantly, "why do you speak to them in parables? Why not tell them plainly?" Jesus smiled faintly, his eyes warm but distant, as though he saw something far beyond the horizon. "Because truth is not forced," he replied. "It is discovered. Those who have ears will hear. Those who seek will find. The rest, they are not ready yet." He rose, brushing sand from his hands. "The seed," he said, "is the word of God. The soil is the heart. Some hearts are hard, some shallow, some crowded by thorns. But when the heart is ready, when it is good soil, the word grows, and nothing can stop it." The disciples nodded slowly. They didn't fully understand, but something about his words settled deep within them, like roots forming beneath the surface. As the day stretched on, Jesus spoke again and again about lamps that should not be hidden, about lost coins found, about shepherds leaving 99 sheep to rescue one. Each story carried truth disguised in simplicity, a truth that lingered long after the words faded. When evening came, the crowd still lingered. No one wanted to leave. They weren't just listening, they were hungry. Not for bread or fish this time, but for something invisible, a nourishment that filled the soul. Jesus stood and looked at them, his eyes soft with compassion. "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness," he said, "for they shall be filled." The crowd murmured in awe, and for a moment, even the sea seemed to quiet. As twilight began to fall, Jesus turned toward the water, the disciples following closely behind. The tide crept higher, erasing the day's footprints, smoothing out the sand until no trace of them remained. But the lessons, the stories, the meanings, stayed within the hearts of those who had listened. John looked back at the fading shoreline, then at Jesus. "Master," he said softly, "will they remember?" Jesus smiled, watching the waves wash the sand clean. "The sea forgets the footprints," he said, "but heaven never forgets the faith that follows them." And as they walked inland, the night wind carried the murmurs of the crowd, still talking, still wondering, still hungry for something that bread could not satisfy. The following morning, the air was thick with anticipation. Word had spread across the hills and villages. The teacher was near again. Families carried baskets and blankets. Farmers left their fields, and fishermen moored their boats. The crowd swelled until it seemed the land itself could not contain them. They came not just for healing or wisdom, but for him, the man who spoke with authority yet carried no weapon, who comforted the broken but bowed to no power. By midday, the sun burned hot above the plains. Jesus stood at the edge of a hill, overlooking the Sea of Galilee, the same waters where he first called his disciples. From that height, he could see thousands, men, women, and children. Faces turned upward, eyes filled with longing. The sight stirred his heart. "They have followed us far," he said softly. "They are hungry." Philip looked out across the crowd, his brow tightening. "Master, even half a year's wages wouldn't buy enough bread for each to have a bite." Andrew hesitated, motioning toward a small boy clutching a bundle. "There's a lad here," he said, "with 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many?" Jesus looked at the boy. The child's eyes were wide, uncertain, but willing. The teacher smiled. "Bring them to me." The boy stepped forward, holding the food close to his chest. His hands trembled as he placed it in Jesus' palms. It wasn't much, just enough for one small meal, but it was everything he had. Jesus lifted the loaves and fish toward heaven. The breeze shifted. The murmurs of the crowd fell silent. "Father," he prayed, "thank you." Then he broke the bread, piece by piece, loaf after loaf, fish after fish. The disciples began to distribute the food, unsure at first, glancing back at the basket every few steps, only to find it never empty. The more they gave, the more there was to give. The miracle unfolded, not in a flash of light, but in the quiet, steady act of sharing. Peter handed bread to a mother holding her child. John passed fish to an old man whose hands shook with age. Laughter rippled through the crowd as disbelief turned into joy. Soon, thousands sat across the grassy hillside, eating until they could eat no more. Children ran barefoot through the grass, crumbs in their hands, their giggles mixing with the sound of the sea. It wasn't just food that filled them, it was hope. The invisible hunger, the kind that gnaws at the soul, was fed that day. When everyone had eaten, Jesus turned to his disciples and said, "Gather the leftovers, let nothing be wasted." They filled 12 baskets, more than they started with. Each disciple carried one, heavy with the evidence that in surrender there is abundance, in giving there is increase. The crowd erupted into shouts and praise. "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world," some cried. Others murmured, "He should be king. A man who feeds thousands could rule nations." But as their cheers grew louder, Jesus' eyes grew sad. They had seen the miracle, but not the message. The bread was never meant to make him a ruler. It was meant to reveal the heart of God, that love gives without keeping count. As dusk approached, he dismissed the crowd. The disciples lingered, still buzzing from the miracle. "They love you," Peter said, his voice filled with wonder. "They finally see who you are." Jesus gazed toward the horizon, where the sky bled orange into violet. "They see the bread," he murmured, "but not yet the truth." He turned away from the noise, from the hands reaching out, from the shouts of men who wanted to crown him king. The miracle had become a misunderstanding. Quietly, he told his disciples to board the boat and cross the lake. "Go ahead of me," he said. "I will follow." As they rowed away, Jesus climbed the hillside alone. The fire of sunset burned behind him, casting his figure in gold and shadow. When he reached the top, he knelt in the cool grass, the distant murmur of the sea below. He prayed not for power, not for glory, but for the hearts of those who had eaten, that they would understand that true nourishment does not come from loaves or fish, but from belief. Below, the last light flickered over the water. The people began to drift home, full but still searching. They did not know that the man who had fed them now sat above them in solitude, whispering prayers over their restless souls. And as night deepened, the wind from the sea began to rise once more, carrying with it a hint of the storm to come. The sun had long slipped beneath the horizon, leaving behind a dim trail of dying light. The sea stretched wide and restless, dark as ink, whispering threats beneath the boat that carried the disciples. The air was heavy, too still at first, then, trembling, as if creation itself held its breath. They rowed in silence, the creak of wood and the dip of oars echoing through the growing wind. Every now and then, lightning flashed far in the distance, illuminating their faces, tired, anxious, haunted by the image of their teacher disappearing into the mountains. He had sent them ahead, insisting they cross to the other side. They obeyed, though not without unease. Peter had turned back once, glancing toward the hill where he prayed alone. There was something about the way Jesus had said goodbye, calm but weighted, that made the night feel different. Now, hours later, the calm was gone. The first wave hit without warning, not large but sharp, splashing over the bow. The disciples jolted, gripping their oars tighter. "The wind's changing," Andrew muttered. "We should turn back." Peter shook his head, his voice rough over the rising gust. "He said cross the sea, so we cross." The next wave came harder. Water sloshed into the boat, soaking their sandals, stinging their skin. Above them, clouds gathered like bruises across the sky. The moon vanished. The stars blinked out. The world became water and darkness. "Keep rowing," Peter shouted, though even his voice trembled now. The wind howled, tearing at their hair, tossing spray into their eyes. The boat pitched violently, wood groaning beneath the strain. John leaned close to James. "He's not here," he said under his breath. Every other storm he was there. This time he's gone. But Peter gritted his teeth, muscles burning. "He told us to go, so we go." Faith and fear fought inside him, wave for wave. The hours dragged, their arms ached, the sea grew wild, rising and falling like a living beast. Every swell threatened to overturn them. Salt stung their eyes, their throats. They shouted to one another, but could barely hear their own voices over the roar. Then came the thunder, low, rolling, endless. Lightning split the sky, revealing their faces for a moment, drenched, pale, desperate. Bartholomew gripped the side of the boat. "We won't make it," he cried. "Not without him." And though no one said it aloud, they all thought the same. Why did he send us here? Why would he leave us in this storm? Rain poured down now, hard and cold. The boat rocked violently, each wave crashing harder than the last. The sea no longer felt like the same one they had known. The calm water where he had once taught and laughed with them. This was chaos, unrestrained and merciless. Peter's hands were blistered from the oar. He could barely keep his eyes open against the wind. Every instinct screamed to give up, to let the storm take them. But deep beneath the panic, a memory flickered. His voice by the shore, steady and certain. "Follow me." And so he did, even now, even through fear. "Row!" Peter shouted again. "Keep rowing!" The others obeyed, though their strength waned. Somewhere, between exhaustion and despair, the rhythm of their rowing began to falter. The boat lurched sideways, caught in a violent gust. The sky flashed once more, lightning tracing jagged light across the black waves. And for a brief, blinding second, Peter saw how small they truly were. Just men, lost in the centre of the sea. A massive wave rose before them, higher than the boat itself. They braced for the crash. The world went white. Then, silence. When the thunder faded, all that remained was the sound of their ragged breathing and the slap of rain against the water. "Is this how it ends?" Thomas whispered. After everything we've seen. But Peter didn't answer. He stared into the distance, squinting through the mist and the rain. The horizon had vanished, swallowed by fog. Yet, for the briefest moment, he thought he saw something. A shape, a shimmer, something moving against the wind. He blinked hard, rubbing salt from his eyes. The shape was gone. Perhaps it was just lightning playing tricks. Then another flash. And there it was again, closer this time. A figure, pale and still, walking across the surface of the water, as though it were solid ground. Peter's breath caught in his throat. The others turned, following his gaze. Their eyes widened. "It's a ghost!" someone shouted. But Peter didn't speak. His hands trembled, not from the cold this time, but from recognition, the kind that only faith could understand. The sea still raged. The storm still screamed. But something in that moment shifted. The fear that had wrapped around their hearts began to crack. Because through the mist, through the roar of the storm, a familiar voice began to rise above it all. The storm roared louder, as if the heavens themselves were tearing open. Waves slammed against the side of the boat, lifting it high before dropping it with a violent crash. The disciples clung to the edges, drenched and trembling, their voices lost to the wind. Every strike of lightning turned the sea into a momentary battlefield of light and shadow. Flashes of terror followed by darkness so thick it felt alive. Then Peter saw it again, that shape in the distance. A figure moving effortlessly across the chaos, robes untouched by the spray, light shimmering faintly around him. It drew closer, step by step, as if the storm itself bowed to his presence. John gasped, pointing. "It's coming toward us!" The others turned, their eyes wide with terror. "It's a spirit!" someone cried out. "A ghost!" Panic spread like fire. They huddled together, shouting over the thunder, each man's fear feeding the next. But through the wind, a voice rose, steady, calm, cutting through the storm like sunlight through clouds. "Take courage," it said. "It is I. Do not be afraid." The sound froze them where they stood. The voice was unmistakable. The same one that had called them from their nets. The same one that had blessed the bread and tea all. Calm the broken. It was him. Peter leaned forward, gripping the side of the boat, his heart pounding. "Lord," he shouted, "if it's really you, tell me to come to you on the water." For a moment, there was only the sound of the sea, and then the voice came again, softer this time. "Come." Without another word, Peter swung his legs over the edge. The others reached for him, but he was already stepping out. His feet met the water, not sinking, not swallowed, but standing. The surface rippled beneath him like living glass. He took one step, then another. Each breath was a battle between faith and fear. The wind howled, waves crashing around him, yet his eyes stayed locked on the figure ahead. The closer he came, the quieter the storm seemed to grow, until he looked down. For a moment, just one, doubt entered his mind. The sea beneath him seemed to shift, reminding him of what he knew to be true. Men do not walk on water. The thought took root, his faith wavered. The wind struck again, harder this time, as if testing him. The surface broke beneath his feet, and he began to sink. Panic seized his chest. "Lord," he cried, choking as water surged around him. "Save me!" And immediately, not a second's delay, a hand reached out through the darkness. Strong, certain, warm. Jesus caught him by the wrist and pulled him up as though lifting a child from the shallows. The storm still raged, but in that moment it no longer mattered. Their eyes met, Peter's wild with fear, Jesus's filled with calm that no tempest could touch. "Oh, you of little faith," Jesus said softly, "why did you doubt?" Together they walked back toward the boat. The disciples watched in stunned silence as the two figures crossed the waves, the sea bending beneath their steps. When they climbed aboard, the wind stopped, instantly. The waves fell flat, the rain ceased, and the world went still. So still, it hurt to breathe. The clouds parted above them, revealing a sky washed clean, the moon gleaming bright and silver. The surface of the sea mirrored it perfectly, calm as glass. No one spoke for a long time. The disciples sat soaked and silent, awe written across their faces. Finally, John whispered what they were all thinking. "Truly, you are the Son of God." Jesus said nothing. He only looked out across the quiet water, as if listening to the fading echo of the storm. The peace that followed was so deep it felt like the whole world had exhaled. Peter sat at his feet, dripping, shivering, but smiling through tears. He didn't fully understand what had just happened, only that faith wasn't about never sinking. It was about knowing who would lift you when you did. The sea lapped gently against the boat, as though apologizing for its fury. The disciples began to row again, this time not from fear, but from purpose. Each pull of the oar carried them closer to shore, closer to whatever awaited them next. And as dawn began to bleed across the horizon, the light touched their faces, revealing eyes no longer shadowed by fear. They had seen power that defied nature, love that reached through chaos, and a hand that never failed to catch them. Somewhere behind them, the waves whispered the truth that would follow them forever. Storms will come, faith will falter, but he walks where fear reigns. And when he speaks, even the sea obeys. The boat glided onward toward the faint outline of land waiting ahead, where new hearts and new lessons awaited them by the water's edge. The morning after the storm, the world seemed reborn. The sea ball lay still and gleaming, as though it had never known fury. The air smelled of rain and salt, fresh and clean. Jesus and his disciples stepped onto the shore, their sandals pressing into wet sand that glistened beneath the rising sun. People were already gathering again, faces eager, hands reaching, hearts heavy with hope. Everywhere they went, crowds followed. They had heard of the storm, of the sea made calm, of a man who could command even the wind. And among them came those who carried wounds no one could see, the kind that lived deep in the soul, quiet but constant. In that crowd was a woman. She moved silently, keeping her head low, her face hidden beneath her shawl. For 12 long years she had suffered, not from one wound, but from a bleeding that never stopped. It had taken everything, her money, her strength, her place in society. The world had turned its back on her, calling her unclean. To be near others was forbidden. To touch them was sin. She lived on the edges, unseen, unheard, unwanted. But that morning, something within her refused to stay hidden any longer. She had heard of him, the teacher who healed with a word, the one who touched lepers and lifted the forgotten. Some said he could forgive sins. Some said he could raise the dead. She didn't know what to believe, but she knew one thing. If she could just reach him, maybe she wouldn't have to suffer anymore. The crowd pressed thick around him as he walked through the narrow street, the disciples struggling to keep order. Everyone wanted something, a miracle, a blessing, a glimpse. The woman's heart pounded as she slipped between them, weak but determined. Each step sent pain through her body, but she pressed on, whispering to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be healed." The noise was overwhelming. Shouts, footsteps, the scrape of sandals on stone. Yet all she could hear was the beating of her own heart. She reached out, trembling. The fringe of his robe fluttered just within reach. And then she touched it. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The air changed. A stillness rippled through the chaos. She felt it before she understood it. Warmth spreading through her body, deep and absolute, like sunlight breaking through dark clouds. The bleeding stopped. The pain was gone. She drew in a sharp breath and covered her mouth, eyes filling with tears. She had been healed, but before she could slip away, Jesus stopped. He turned slowly, scanning the crowd. "Who touched me?" The disciples exchanged confused looks. Peter spoke first, half laughing. "Master, the people are crowding all around you. Everyone's touching you." But Jesus shook his head. His gaze softened, searching. "Someone touched me. I felt power go out from me." The woman froze. The weight of his words struck her like thunder. Shame and awe battled within her. She could have stayed silent, could have disappeared into the sea of faces, but something greater than fear moved her forward. She fell to her knees before him, trembling. "It was me," she whispered. I touched you. I was sick for years. But now, her voice broke. Now I'm healed. The crowd fell silent. All eyes turned to her, the woman they had ignored, the one they'd cast aside. Jesus knelt before her, his expression full of something deeper than compassion, understanding. He reached out, gently lifting her chin so their eyes met. Daughter, he said, the word itself a restoration. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. It wasn't just her body that was healed. It was her place in the world, her dignity, her name. In that one word, daughter, she was no longer forgotten. She belonged again. The crowd watched in stunned silence as she rose, her steps steady, her tears shining like morning dew. Whispers began to spread through the people. The woman who had been unclean was whole again. The murmurs grew louder. People who had come to see miracles now came to seek them. Mothers clutched their sick children closer. Old men leaned on their staffs, staring after Jesus with new eyes. Hope, once a fragile rumour, now felt like something real, something near. Jesus continued walking, the disciples following behind, each step echoing with meaning. The healed woman stood at the edge of the road, her heart still racing. She didn't call out again. She didn't need to. The peace in her chest said everything words never could. As the sun rose higher, her story began to move ahead of him, carried by whispers spreading from one village to the next. They spoke of the woman who reached out in silence and found life again. And because of her faith, more broken souls began to follow the road that led to him, searching, hoping, reaching for the same grace that had found her. The road was still buzzing with murmurs of the woman who had been healed. Her story had spread like wind through dry grass, igniting something deep in the hearts of the people, a fragile but burning faith. As Jesus walked, the crowd thickened again, drawn by hope and curiosity. And then, through the noise, came a desperate voice cutting through the air like a cry in the night. "Teacher, please! My daughter is dying." The crowd parted as a man stumbled forward, robes torn, face streaked with tears and dust. He was Jairus, a synagogue leader, a man of status and respect, now kneeling in the dirt before the very man his peers questioned and feared. But none of that mattered anymore. Desperation leaves no room for pride. He grasped Jesus' hands, trembling. "She's only 12. Please, come and lay your hands on her so she may live." Jesus looked into his eyes and saw the same thing he had seen in the woman's, faith that refused to die, even when everything else did. "Take me to her," he said softly. They began to move through the crowd again, but slower this time. People pressed in from every direction, voices rising with need, hope and awe. Jairus tried to hurry him, his steps frantic, but Jesus walked with the same calm pace he always did, as though time itself bent around his will. Before they could reach the house, a man came running toward them from the distance, his face pale with sorrow. He stopped in front of Jairus, shaking his head. "Your daughter." His voice broke. "She's gone. Don't bother the teacher anymore." The words hit like a hammer. Jairus froze. The world tilted, spinning between grief and disbelief. His knees gave out, but before he could fall completely, a hand steadied him, firm, certain, alive. "Do not be afraid," Jesus said quietly. "Only believe." There was no logic in it, no reason, just truth. Jairus looked up at him and nodded, because when faith is all that's left, you hold on to it with everything you have. When they arrived, the house was filled with wailing. Flutes played their morning song, and women wept openly, clutching each other. The air was thick with sorrow, heavy and suffocating. Jesus entered calmly, his presence shifting the room like a sudden gust through still air. The mourners looked at him, some with confusion, others with scorn. "Why this commotion and crying?" he asked. "The child is not dead, she's only sleeping." The laughter that followed was sharp, bitter. "Sleeping," someone spat. "She's gone!" But Jesus didn't argue. He simply asked them all to leave. The noise faded as they filed out, muttering under their breath. Only a few remained. Peter, James, John, and the child's mother and father. The room grew still. The only sound was the soft breath of grief. The little girl lay on her bed, pale and still, her small hands resting at her sides. The light through the window fell across her face, soft and cold. Jesus knelt beside her. For a long moment, he said nothing, only watched her, as if seeing something beyond what human eyes could. Then he reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing gently over her fingers. "Talitha Koum," he whispered. The words were tender, spoken not to the dead, but to the living. "Little girl, arise." And she did. Her eyes fluttered open, blinking against the light. She drew in a deep breath, shaky but real. The room gasped as one. The mother fell to her knees, covering, her mouth in shock. The father could only stare, trembling, as his daughter sat up and looked around. Jesus smiled softly, lifting her to her feet. "Give her something to eat," he said. It was so simple, so ordinary, and yet the ordinary had just become miraculous. The parents clung to their child, tears falling freely, the kind that taste like both grief and grace. Outside, the professional mourners still lingered, ready to return to their dirge, until the door opened and the little girl stepped into the sunlight. The wails turned into gasps, gasps into shouts. Some fell to their knees, others fled in awe. The story would be told 100 different ways before nightfall. A girl once dead, now walking, laughing, eating bread in her mother's arms. Jesus slipped quietly through the commotion, back into the street. The disciples followed in silence, still trying to understand the impossible they had just witnessed. Peter finally spoke, his voice low. "Master, even death listens to you." Jesus looked toward the setting sun, its red light spilling over the rooftops. "Death," he said, "has never been stronger than love." Behind them, laughter echoed from the home, bright, alive, undeniable. The sound carried on the evening wind, weaving through the village, past doorways and open fields, into the hearts of all who heard it. And by nightfall, whispers of the miracle had spread farther than any tide, the rumour of resurrection moving like fire through dry grass, turning doubt into wonder, and wonder into faith. The sound of laughter still lingered in the streets from the miracle at Jairus' house, drifting like music through the morning air. Hope had spread faster than rumour, but with it came something else, something quieter, yet weightier. Expectation. Crowds now followed Jesus not just for healing, but for answers. They wanted to understand how these things were possible, and what they meant for their own hearts. By the lake shore, he sat once more among them. The sea shimmered like glass, the sun painting the surface gold. People gathered on the slope above the water, pressing close, their faces turned upward. Some leaned in hunger for truth. Others, arms crossed, came to judge. And yet all listened when he began to speak. He told them of seeds. "A farmer went out to sow," Jesus said, his voice carrying easily over the sound of waves lapping at the shore. And as he scattered the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky ground, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly, but because the soil was shallow, when the sun rose, it withered away. Some fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants, but some fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. He paused, letting the image hang in the air. The people glanced at one another, murmuring. Farmers nodded thoughtfully, scholars frowned. A few looked disappointed. They had come for miracles, not farming lessons. But Jesus only said, "Whoever has ears, let them hear." Later, when the crowd had begun to scatter, the disciples came to him, still puzzling over his words. "Master," Matthew asked, "why do you speak to them in parables? Why not tell them plainly what you mean?" Jesus looked out toward the water, the light shifting across his face. "Because not all hearts are ready to see," he said. "The truth is like sunlight. It warms the open, but blinds the closed. The parable lets those who are willing discover the truth themselves. Those who do not seek will not see, even when it stands before them." He knelt, drawing lines in the sand with his finger as he continued. "The seed is the word of God. The path is the heart, hardened by pride. The word cannot enter. The rocky soil is the one who receives with joy, but has no root. When trouble comes, faith dies." The thorns are the cares of this world, wealth, fear, distraction. They choke the word until it bears nothing. But the good soil is the heart that listens, that humbles itself, that allows the truth to take root. And once it takes root, it grows. The disciples listened in silence. Around them, the crowd lingered at a distance, some curious, some restless. Peter turned the thought over in his mind, gazing at the field beyond the shore where real farmers were sowing their crops. So the seed is always the same, he murmured, but the soil decides the harvest. Jesus nodded. The seed never fails, only the soil does. The words sank deep. The disciples exchanged glances, each one wondering what kind of soil lived within his own heart. That evening, as the sun began to dip behind the hills, people returned again, bringing friends, family, the sick, the searching. Jesus healed quietly, spoke softly, blessed children, and comforted the weary. But not everyone came with open hearts. Among the crowds stood men who watched closely, whispering to one another. Pharisees, teachers of the law, and skeptics who came not to believe, but to find fault. They listened to his stories, but heard only threats to their authority. They saw the miracles, but found only reasons to accuse. They could not see the truth standing before them, because their soil had hardened long ago. That night, the disciples sat around a small fire. The waves whispered nearby, and sparks from the flames rose into the dark sky. Andrew broke the silence. Do you think they'll ever understand? Jesus looked into the fire, the glow reflecting in his eyes. Some will, he said quietly, and some will not. But the word must still be sown. Even rocky ground can change when the rain comes. A gentle wind blew across the sea, carrying with it the scent of the fields beyond. Somewhere in the distance, farmers were still at work, scattering seeds beneath the stars. Jesus lay back against the sand, gazing up at the constellations. Faith begins small, he whispered, like a seed. But if it finds good soil, no storm, no drought, no darkness can stop it from growing. The disciples sat in silence, watching the fire burn lower, the night deepening around them. They didn't yet realize that the words he spoke were not just about the crowd or the Pharisees. They were about them too. Their faith had sprouted quickly, but the tests had not yet come. And as the wind picked up and the flames flickered, they sensed it. Change in the air, a coming weight. Some hearts would bloom, others would break. The testing was about to begin. The night after he spoke of seeds and soil, the wind shifted. It carried with it a strange stillness, the kind that falls before something sacred. The crowds dispersed, the disciples rested, but Jesus walked away quietly, his steps leading away from the comfort of firelight and into the vast emptiness of the wilderness. He had told them before that faith must take root to grow, and now his own would be tested. The Spirit led him there into solitude, where no comfort of man could follow. The wilderness stretched endlessly before him, dry, vast, silent. The ground was cracked, the air heavy with heat and dust. For 40 days he wandered. No food, no water, only the sun by day and the cold stars by night. Hunger gnawed at his body, thirst burned his throat. Yet his heart was still. He prayed in the quiet, words whispered to the Father through cracked lips. Each prayer was not a plea for rescue, but a surrender. Your will be done. Then came the whisper. It wasn't loud, nor violent. It slipped through the air like smoke, curling into his thoughts. If you are the Son of God, it murmured, tell these stones to become bread. Jesus looked down at the lifeless rocks, grey and dry. His body ached for sustenance, his stomach hollow and twisting. But he knew this voice. It was the same one that had haunted humankind since the garden, subtle, seductive, twisting truth into temptation. He lifted his gaze toward the horizon and answered, calm but firm, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. The voice fell silent for a moment, but the desert wind stirred again. Suddenly, he stood on the highest point of the temple in Jerusalem. Or perhaps it was a vision so vivid it felt real. Below him, the city spread wide, its people unaware of who stood above them. The voice came again, sly, almost taunting. "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. The angels will catch you. The scriptures say it. He will command them concerning you." Jesus closed his eyes. He could almost hear the rush of wind beneath him, the imagined applause of men who would see and believe. But that kind of faith, born of spectacle, was no faith at all. "You shall not put the Lord your God to the test," he said, his tone steady as stone. The vision broke like glass. He was back in the wilderness, weaker now, the sun beating down mercilessly. Sweat streaked his face. Every breath was labour. Still, he pressed on. The path wound between jagged rocks and thorny brush, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by the silence. Then, once more, the whisper. This time it came rich and full, the tone of false generosity. The world seemed to shift again. He was on a mountain now, overlooking kingdoms that stretched beyond sight, cities glimmering with gold, armies marching in perfect form, the noise of power and worship echoing faintly. "All this," the voice said smoothly, "I will give you authority, glory, dominion, everything the world holds dear. Just bow down and worship me." For the first time, Jesus lifted his head and looked into the direction of the voice, not afraid, not uncertain, but resolute. The offer glittered like a mirage, beautiful and hollow. "Get behind me, Satan," he said, his voice low but filled with unshakable command. "For it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and serve him only." The air changed instantly. The presence that had lingered, thick and suffocating, vanished. The desert fell silent again, not the silence of emptiness, but of victory. Jesus sank to his knees, weary beyond words. The sun softened, and a breeze, cool, gentle, unlike the desert wind, swept over him. In the stillness, he felt it, the Father's nearness. And then, as if in answer, angels appeared, not in blinding light or trumpet sound, but quietly, reverently. They brought food and water, tending to him as one tends to a wounded traveller. He ate slowly, the taste of life returning. His strength rose not from the bread, but from the peace that filled him. The trial had not been about survival, but surrender. He had faced the voice that offered power, and chose obedience instead. As he rose from the ground, the wilderness seemed less hostile, almost holy. What once looked barren now felt sacred, the place where the heaven met the dust. He began to walk again, each step lighter than the one before. The sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the desert in gold and crimson. In the distance lay towns filled with broken hearts, sick bodies, and searching souls. People waiting for hope they could not yet name. And so, emerging from solitude and shadow, Jesus stepped back into the world of men, victorious, gentle, and ready to walk among the lost. When he returned from the wilderness, the world no longer felt the same. The air itself seemed to bend around him, not with spectacle, but with stillness. Wherever he walked, people followed, the weary, the wounded, the curious, and those who came simply to see if the rumours were true. His words had begun to stir hearts and unsettle powers. Some came with faith, others came with questions sharpened like blades. It was the Sabbath when he entered the synagogue in Capernaum. The air inside was cool, dim, filled with the hum of quiet prayers. Scrolls rested on the table, unrolled with care. Men stood in neat rows, their robes crisp and their gazes stern. The laws of Moses governed everything here. When to rest, when to work, when to speak. But among the order and piety stood a man whose right hand was withered and useless. He kept to the back, avoiding the eyes of others. He wasn't supposed to draw attention. He knew the rules. The Sabbath was for rest, not for mending what life had broken. Still, when Jesus entered, the man's gaze lifted. Hope flickered, hesitant, trembling, but alive. Across the room, the Pharisees watched. Their eyes followed every movement. They'd heard what he'd done, the miracles, the forgiveness, the way he spoke of God as if he knew him personally. And they waited, eager not for healing, but for proof that this teacher would break the very laws he claimed to fulfill. Jesus stood near the center, his eyes sweeping over them all. He could feel their thoughts pressing against him like walls closing in, but his gaze stopped on the man with the withered hand. "Stand up," Jesus said. The man hesitated. The room tensed. A murmur ran through the crowd. "Stand up and come here," he repeated, his tone not commanding but inviting. Slowly the man stepped forward. All eyes turned toward him, some pitying, others judging. He stopped before Jesus, trembling beneath the weight of 100 stares. Jesus looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every teacher, every skeptic, every heart locked behind tradition. "Tell me," he said evenly, "is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it?" Silence. No one answered. The question cut too deep. It wasn't about the law anymore. It was about the heart. Jesus' expression darkened, not with anger, but grief. "You know the law," he said softly, "but you've forgotten mercy." He turned to the man and smiled gently. "Stretch out your hand." The man's breath caught. For years he had hidden that hand, ashamed of its weakness, its deformity. But something in Jesus' voice, steady, kind, unwavering, made obedience easier than fear. He lifted it. Before the crowd's eyes, the twisted fingers straightened. The colour returned. The skin flushed with life. The man gasped as strength filled his arm, and for the first time in years, his hand obeyed him. He flexed it, staring in disbelief, laughter and tears breaking free all at once. The crowd erupted. Some shouted praise, others whispered in shock. But at the back, the Pharisees exchanged dark looks. To them, this was not a miracle, it was rebellion. Healing on the Sabbath was work. Work was forbidden. By their measure, he had broken the law of God. They left the synagogue quickly, their robes brushing the ground like storm clouds gathering. Outside they spoke in low, urgent tones. Plans began to take shape, plans not for peace, but for silencing. Inside, however, the man with the healed hand fell to his knees before Jesus, still trembling. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You've given me back my life." Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder. "The Sabbath was made for man," he said gently, "not man for the Sabbath." The man nodded, still unable to stop staring at the miracle that was now part of his own body. Around them, others pressed forward, the sick, the crippled, the forgotten, each one daring to believe that maybe compassion was greater than regulation. Outside, word spread quickly. By sunset, the story had reached every corner of the village. "He heals even on the Sabbath," they said. "He cares more for people than for rules." And while some grew suspicious, most grew hopeful. Mothers brought their children, elders hobbled out of their homes, fishermen left their nets at dawn just to see him pass. The law had been their structure, but this man, this Jesus, was becoming their freedom. The stars began to rise as he walked out into the evening, the healed man following behind, still flexing his fingers beneath the moonlight. The sound of the sea echoed nearby, calm and rhythmic. And though the murmurs of resistance had begun to form in the shadows, compassion, unyielding, fearless, divine, moved ahead of him like a flame carried by the wind, spreading from heart to heart, lighting the darkness wherever he went. The night after the healing, the streets of Capernaum hummed with whispers. Some called him a prophet, others a threat. The fishermen told the story by the fire, how the man with the withered hand could now lift his nets with ease. The children repeated it in awe. But in the shadows of the temple courts, the teachers of the law gathered, their voices low and bitter. Still, morning came, and with it another crowd. Jesus walked through the narrow streets, the sun climbing above the rooftops. Dust swirled around his feet as people pressed in, some calling out his name, others watching in silence. Among them sat a man against the wall, blind from birth, his face turned toward the sound of footsteps. He had lived his whole life in darkness. He knew the world only by sound and scent, the chatter of merchants, the clang of tools, the warmth of sunlight on his skin. He begged daily at the same corner, unseen by those who passed him, except when they tossed a coin without looking. He had grown used to being ignored, his world defined by shadows he could not see. When Jesus and his disciples approached, the murmuring crowd parted. The disciples noticed the man and stopped. "Rabbi," one of them asked, "who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus looked at the man, his expression neither pitying nor curious. "Neither," he said. "This happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." The blind man lifted his head, his brow furrowing. He had heard many voices in his life, harsh ones, mocking ones, empty ones. But this one carried something different. It wasn't just sound, it was presence. Jesus knelt beside him. The crowd leaned closer, whispering. He spat lightly on the ground, mixed the dust with his fingers until it became clay, and gently spread it over the man's eyes. The touch was warm, gentle, alive. "Go," Jesus said quietly. "Wash in the pool of Siloam." The man hesitated. He couldn't see the direction, but hands from the crowd guided him. He stumbled forward, the mud drying against his skin, the scent of clay and earth filling his senses. Each step was uncertain, yet something inside him pulsed with growing faith, the kind that doesn't come from sight, but from trust. When he reached the pool, he knelt. The water rippled softly in the morning light. He cupped it in his hands, trembling, and began to wash. At first, nothing. Then, a spark. Light, faint and blinding all at once. Shapes blurred into existence. The shimmer of water, the curve of his fingers, the blue of the sky, colours he had never known existed. His breath caught in his throat. The world flooded in, brilliant and overwhelming. He laughed, a sound that startled the birds nearby. "I can see," he cried, his voice cracking with disbelief. He ran through the streets, laughing and shouting. "It's me, I was blind, and now I see." Neighbours came out from their homes, stunned. Some said, "It's him." Others argued, "No, it only looks like him." But he insisted, "I am the one. The man called Jesus made clay, put it on my eyes, and now I see." They brought him to the Pharisees, the same men who had already begun to harden their hearts against what they could not control. The miracle, to them, was not joy. It was threat. The man stood before them, still trembling with wonder, the light of day reflecting in his new eyes. "How did this happen?" they demanded. "He put clay on my eyes," he said simply, "and now I see." "It was the Sabbath," one of them snapped. "He broke the law again," others argued. But how could a sinner perform such signs? Their words clashed like swords, law against mercy, pride against proof. Finally, they turned on the man himself. "What do you say about him?" He paused, the room thick with tension. Then he spoke, his voice steady. "He is a prophet." The Pharisees glared. They called for his parents, questioned them, pressed for denial. But fear ruled the room. Fear of losing control, fear of what truth might cost. When they turned to the man again, demanding he condemn the one who healed him, he shook his head. "I only know this. I was blind, and now I see." It was all he needed to say. Truth so simple, it silenced lies. They cast him out in anger, but he left smiling, eyes lifted to the sky. The first sunset he had ever seen painting the clouds gold and more crimson. Later, as he walked alone, Jesus found him. "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" he asked. The man turned toward the voice that had once spoken sight into his soul. "Tell me who he is, Lord, that I may believe." Jesus smiled softly. "You have seen him. He is the one speaking to you now." Tears filled the man's eyes again, not from pain, but from joy. He fell to his knees. "Lord, I believe." The light around them glowed like morning made flesh, pure and endless. But even as faith deepened in some hearts, in others the darkness thickened, and with every miracle that opened eyes, the blindness of opposition grew darker still. The man who had once been blind walked through the village square, his steps steady and sure. Every colour, every face, every flicker of light was a miracle he could not stop marvelling at. But not everyone shared his joy. Behind him whispers spread like smoke. The Pharisees had seen enough. Sight restored, hands healed, laws crossed. To them this Jesus was no longer a mystery to study. He was a danger to control. That evening, Jesus entered the temple courts, where the lamps burned low and the air hummed with murmured prayers. The scribes and Pharisees were already there, waiting, their expressions carved from suspicion. Their robes were flawless, their posture rigid, but their eyes told another story. Envy, fear, pride, wrapped in piety. "Teacher," one of them called, his tone sweet with false respect, "we know you speak of righteousness. Tell us then, why do you dine with sinners and tax collectors? Should not a holy man keep company with the holy?" Jesus turned to them slowly, his face calm, his eyes deep with something between grief and mercy. Around them, the crowd gathered closer, curious to see what he would say. "It is not the healthy who need a doctor," Didin, he said, "but the sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." A murmur rippled through the people. Some nodded, others frowned. The Pharisees stiffened, their pride pricked. They spoke again, sharper this time. "You claim to honor God, yet you break his law, healing on the Sabbath, forgiving sins as if you were above Moses himself." Jesus looked at them, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then he knelt and drew a line in the dust with his finger, the same dust from which all men were made, the same dust that would one day receive them again. When he finally spoke, his words cut clean through the silence. "You search the scriptures," he said, "thinking that in them you have eternal life, but you refuse to come to the one of whom they speak." The Pharisees shifted uneasily. Their power rested on the reverence of others, on being seen as keepers of truth. But this man looked at them as though he could see right through the fine fabric of their robes and into the cracks beneath. He stood, his voice steady but fierce, his words like light breaking through darkness. "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees! Hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup, but inside you are full of greed and self-indulgence. You honor God with your lips, but your hearts are far from him." A gasp rose from the crowd. Some stepped back in awe, others whispered in fear. Never had anyone spoken to the leaders like this, not with rage, but with truth that felt heavier than condemnation. One of the elders, red-faced with anger, stepped forward. "By what authority do you say these things?" he demanded. "Who gave you this right?" Jesus met his gaze, unflinching. "The same authority that gives sight to the blind, that lifts the broken, that calls the dead to rise." The words hung in the air like thunder before the storm. For a moment, the Pharisees had no answer. Their mouths opened, but no words came. Pride choked the truth they could not bear to hear. Around them, the people stirred, not against the law, but against the weight of its corruption. They saw now that holiness was not control, but compassion, not rule, but relationship. Jesus turned toward the crowd, his voice softening. "Beware of those who love to be honored in the marketplace, who pray loudly for praise, who widen their garments so others may see their holiness. The kingdom of God does not belong to the proud, but to the poor in spirit, those who know they need mercy." An old woman near the steps began to weep quietly. A young man, once a thief, lowered his head, tears falling freely. The truth was painful, but it was the kind that healed. The Pharisees, however, stood rigid, their hearts coiling tighter. They could not forgive being exposed. As Jesus walked out of the temple, their eyes followed him like knives. In the shadows of the courtyard, two of them whispered together. "He must be stopped," one said, "before the people turn from us completely." The other nodded, his voice low and venomous. "He speaks of light," he hissed, "but he brings only division." And as the last of the crowd dispersed into the fading daylight, their anger began to harden into resolve. The sound of plotting replaced the songs of praise. In the gathering dusk, Jesus walked ahead of his disciples, the city behind him glowing faintly under the setting sun. The air was still, but something darker had begun to move, unseen yet unmistakable. Among the murmuring crowds and shadowed corridors, betrayal had found its breath. The road to Galilee was long and dry, winding through the hills of Samaria, where few Jews chose to travel. Most avoided that path entirely, Too much history, too much division between people who once shared the same blood. But Jesus did not avoid the hard places. He walked straight into them, as if walls and prejudice were nothing more than mist before the morning sun. By midday, the heat shimmered on the stones. The disciples had gone ahead to find food, leaving him to rest beside a well just outside the town of Sychar. It was Jacob's well, ancient, deep, sacred, the kind of place that had seen centuries of thirst and conversation. He sat quietly, the sound of his breathing mingling with the soft hum of wind across the hills. Then footsteps, hesitant, uneven. A woman approached, carrying a clay jar. She came alone, her shoulders drawn in, her gaze fixed on the ground. Most women came in the cool of morning, in groups, chatting and laughing. But not her. The noon sun meant solitude, and safety from the eyes that judged. When she reached the well, she froze. A Jewish man sat there, watching her with calm curiosity. He shouldn't have been speaking to her, not by custom, not by law. She hesitated, expecting mockery, perhaps dismissal. Instead, his voice broke the silence gently. "Give me a drink." She blinked, startled. "You, a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman." He smiled faintly. "If you knew the gift of God, and who it is that asks you, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman frowned, her voice edged with irony. "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob?" Jesus looked at the well, then back at her. "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give will never thirst. It will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." Something in his tone, gentle yet certain, broke through her guard. She set down her jar slowly. "Then give me this water," she said, "so I won't have to keep coming here." His eyes softened, but his next words cut to the heart. "Go, call your husband, and come back." The woman froze. Her throat tightened. "I have no husband," she said quietly. Jesus nodded, his gaze steady but kind. "You are right. You have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." Her breath caught. The air seemed to still around them. No one else could have known that. No stranger, no traveller. Shame burned in her chest. Yet the way he looked at her, it wasn't with disgust, but understanding. He saw her fully, and did not turn away. "Sir," she whispered, voice trembling, "I see that you are a prophet." She tried to deflect, to steer the conversation towards safer ground. "Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain," she said, "but you Jews say the place to worship is Jerusalem." Jesus replied softly, "Believe me, the time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. True worshippers will worship in spirit and truth, for the Father seeks such as these." She looked at him, uncertain, the weight of years of rejection still heavy on her shoulders. "I know that Messiah is coming," she said. "When he comes, he will explain everything." And then, the moment that changed everything. Jesus leaned closer, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I, the one speaking to you, am he." Her heart stopped. For a moment, the world seemed to collapse into silence. Just the well, the wind, and those words echoing through her soul. The jar slipped from her hands and hit the ground, spilling water that sparkled in the sun like tears. Her shame, the burden she carried for years, felt suddenly weightless. She wasn't being condemned. She was being found. Just then, the disciples returned, surprised to see him speaking with her. But she didn't wait for their questions. She turned and ran, faster than she had in years, her feet kicking up dust along the path back to the village. She burst into the marketplace, breathless and radiant. "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did," she cried. Could this be the Messiah? The people stopped what they were doing. The same woman they had whispered about, the one they had avoided, was now the loudest voice in town. Her shame transformed into testimony. Men and women followed her back toward the well, curiosity giving way to hope, and as they came, they saw him sitting there still, calm, waiting, as if he had known all along that her voice would be the one to bring them. That day, the well became more than a place of water. It became the birthplace of faith. The woman's joy rippled through her village like sunlight spreading across the surface of still water. Quiet at first, then unstoppable, lighting fires of belief in every heart it touched. The woman's laughter still echoed faintly across the hills of Samaria, her footsteps light as she ran back toward her village. Behind her, the well shimmered under the noonday sun, silent witness to the moment when shame was turned into testimony. In the days that followed, word of the encounter spread like wildfire. Entire families came to see the man who knew their hearts and offered no condemnation, only living water. But while hearts opened in Samaria, in Jerusalem the air thickened with unrest. Each miracle, each word of mercy that crossed the borders of custom and purity was seen not as grace, but as defiance. The more people followed him, the more the powerful grew uneasy. Jesus moved among the people, healing quietly, teaching with parables that wrapped eternal truths in simple language. Yet, in the courts and meeting halls, his name became a spark for argument. The Pharisees, wounded in pride, whispered that he led Israel astray. The Sadducees, cautious and political, feared he would provoke Rome's wrath. And in the shadowed corridors of authority, alliances began to form. Enemies joining hands over a shared unease. Rumours reached him daily. Some said he would claim the throne of David. Others believed he would overthrow Caesar. They missed the point entirely. His kingdom was not of walls or swords, but of hearts reborn, a kingdom unseen, spreading in silence through mercy, forgiveness, and truth. Still, the murmurs grew. One afternoon, while teaching outside the city, a group of men approached, their fine robes stiff in the desert wind. The crowd fell silent as they confronted him. "Tell us plainly," one demanded. "Are you the Messiah, the one sent to deliver Israel?" Jesus studied them, their eyes sharp with suspicion, not hope. He answered, "I have told you, and you do not believe. My Father's works bear witness to who I am, but you do not hear because you do not belong to my flock." A ripple of outrage spread through the group. "Blasphemy," one hissed. "He calls God his Father," Jesus continued, his tone calm but unyielding. "The Father and I are one." The crowd gasped. Stones were lifted in trembling hands. For a moment, the air hung heavy with the possibility of violence. But before the first stone could fall, Jesus stepped through the crowd. Somehow, though he did not run, they could not touch him. The same hands that reached for violence fell limp at their sides. By evening, he and his disciples had left the city. They crossed into the countryside, where olive trees grew and the air was free of accusation. Yet even there, the tension followed, invisible but present, like thunder building beyond the horizon. Peter spoke as they walked. "Master, they twist your words no matter what you say. Why not stay silent before them?" Jesus smiled faintly. "Because truth must be spoken, even when ears are closed. Light does not ask darkness for permission to shine." They reached a hillside where the world seemed to fall away beneath them. The city lights shimmered faintly in the distance, beautiful, fragile, unaware of what was coming. Below, the murmur of the people carried through the dusk. Some argued loudly in the streets, divided between faith and fear, between the hope of freedom and the comfort of rule. Families split over his name, brothers quarrelled, teachers turned against their own students. The truth was revealing not just hearts, but the fractures within them. Andrew sat beside him and sighed. "It feels like everything is breaking apart." Jesus looked out over the land, the wind tugging gently at his cloak. "It must," he said softly. "You cannot pour new wine into old skins. The hearts of men cling to what they know, even when it imprisons them." The night deepened, stars flickering to life one by one. In the distance, torches moved through the streets. Soldiers, officials, priests, power gathering in secret rooms, plans spoken behind closed doors, a fragile peace trembling on the edge of collapse. And yet, amid the noise of politics and fear, Jesus turned his gaze upward. The disciples watched as he stood, eyes lifted to the heavens, face bathed in the quiet light of the stars. Without a word, he began to climb the mountainside, his steps sure, his purpose unchanged. They didn't follow immediately. Something about the moment felt sacred, as though even the wind dared not disturb him. He went higher, leaving behind the noise of men, seeking communion not with crowds or kings, but with the Father who had sent him. Above the turmoil of the world, the mountain waited, silent, ancient, steadfast. And there, in its solitude, he prayed, the faint glow of the city far below, flickering like the last ember of a fading fire. Days after leaving Samaria, the air grew cooler as they journeyed north, away from the villages that now whispered his name with reverence and hope. The disciples walked behind him, still speaking of the woman at the well, her joy, her boldness, the way her words had turned an entire town toward the light. Yet beneath their awe lingered something heavier, a growing awareness that not everyone welcomed that light. Crowds followed, but so did tension. Talk of him had reached the ears of rulers and priests alike, and the road ahead felt narrower with each step. Perhaps sensing the weight pressing upon their hearts, Jesus led 3 of them, Peter, James, and John, away from the noise, up into the stillness of a mountain. They climbed in silence. The path was steep, their breath thin, the air scented with stone and pine. When they reached the summit, the world spread beneath them, valleys wrapped in mist, rivers glinting like threads of silver. Jesus moved a few steps ahead, then stopped. "Pray with me," he said softly. They did, though sleep tugged at their eyes. The climb had drained them, and the stillness of the mountain wrapped around them like a blanket. Peter blinked, head heavy, and when his eyes opened again, the world had changed. Before him stood Jesus, but no longer as he had known him. His face shone like the sun itself, and his clothes gleamed white, brighter than any light on earth could make them. The air trembled with radiance. Around him stood 2 others, figures of ancient memory, their presence unmistakable. Moses, the giver of the law, and Elijah, the prophet of fire. They spoke with him as if no time divided them, their words carried by the mountain wind, fragments of eternity discussing what must come. Peter could hardly breathe. His heart thundered in awe and terror. "Lord," he blurted out, "it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 shelters, 1 for you, 1 for Moses, and 1 for Elijah." Even as he spoke, a cloud began to form above them, vast and luminous. It rolled down over the mountain, swallowing the light until only their silhouettes remained. And from within that cloud came a voice, deep, resonant, unmistakable. "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." The sound shook them to their core. They fell to the ground, faces pressed to the earth, trembling as the weight of divine presence filled the air. Every doubt, every question, every fear vanished beneath that voice. Then silence. A hand touched Peter's shoulder, gentle, steady. He opened his eyes. The cloud was gone. Moses and Elijah had vanished. Only Jesus stood before them, no longer blinding, but familiar, calm, human once more. The morning sun touched his face, and he smiled quietly. "Get up," he said. "Do not be afraid." They rose slowly, still shaking. The air smelled of dew and smoke, and the world below glowed gold under the new day. None of them spoke. Words felt too small. As they began their descent, Peter glanced back once more at the summit, half expecting to see the light return, but there was only the sky, blue, vast, indifferent. He turned to Jesus, wanting to ask what they had seen, what it meant, why such glory appeared only to fade again. Before he could speak, Jesus said softly, "Tell no one what you have seen, until the Son of Man is raised from the dead." The words struck like a chill through the warm air. Raised from the dead. None of them knew how to answer that. James frowned. John looked at the ground. Peter's thoughts raced. Resurrection meant death, and death was the one thing they couldn't bear to imagine touching him. The path down was steep and narrow, their sandals slipping on loose stones. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the faint echo of the voice from the cloud. Listen to him. They walked on, silent, hearts heavy with awe and confusion. What they had seen atop that mountain could not be spoken of, not yet. It wasn't time. The light was not meant to stay there. It was meant to guide them through what was coming. For though they had seen his glory, light brighter than the sun, holiness unveiled, They would soon learn that glory was not reached through power or crowns, but through a cross. As they neared the base of the mountain, the sounds of the world returned. Children laughing, merchants calling, the hum of life continuing unaware. Peter glanced at Jesus again, the memory of that radiance still burning behind his eyes. And though none of them spoke, they all understood the same truth in their silence. Before glory comes, suffering must descend first. The mountain behind them faded into the haze of morning. Its sacred light now a memory burned into their hearts. The disciples walked quietly, each step carrying the echo of the voice that had thundered through the cloud. "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." They had seen what a few men ever would, his glory unveiled. Yet even as that brilliance faded, a shadow began to stretch before them, the road south, the road to Jerusalem. Jesus walked ahead, his pace steady, his gaze fixed. There was a weight in his silence now, not of fear, but of certainty. He knew where the path led. He had known from the beginning. Every step toward the holy city was a step toward the cross. The others followed, whispering among themselves, trying to make sense of what lay ahead. Peter still struggled with the words raised from the dead. He wanted to ask again, but something about Jesus' face, calm, resolute, touched by a quiet sadness, told him this was not the time. The road wound through fields of olive and grain, where shepherds tended their flocks and travellers rested in the shade. People recognized him along the way. They ran to greet him, bringing their sick, their broken, their desperate. And though his own burden grew heavier, he did not turn them away. He laid his hands upon the blind, the crippled, the lost, healing them with the same compassion he had shown since the beginning. But this time, his voice carried a different tone. The gentleness remained, but beneath it was urgency, as if every word, every parable, was a final preparation. One afternoon, as they stopped to rest along the roadside, a man approached, young, wealthy, dressed in fine linen. He knelt before Jesus and asked, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus looked at him, seeing sincerity behind the man's eyes, but also something else, a chain the man didn't realize he wore. "You know the commandments," Jesus said. "Da stad. Do not murder, do not steal, do not bear false witness. Honor your father and mother." The man nodded eagerly. "All these I have kept since my youth." Jesus smiled faintly. "One thing you lack," he said. "Go, sell what you own, and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." The man's face fell. He rose slowly, eyes dark with sorrow, and walked away without another word. His riches had been his comfort, and he could not let them go. The disciples watched in silence. Then Peter spoke, hesitant but honest. "Lord, we have left everything to follow you. What then will there be for us?" Jesus turned toward him. "Truly I tell you, no one who has left home or family or fields for my sake will fail to receive 100-fold in this life, and in the life to come, eternal life. But remember, many who are first will be last, and the last first." They nodded, though the words sank slowly. The cost of following him was becoming clearer, not just leaving behind nets or homes, but surrendering the life they thought they were building. The road to Jerusalem wasn't just his, it was theirs too. As they travelled farther, the air grew cooler, the sky paler. Pilgrims filled the roads, heading toward the city for the coming Passover. Some greeted Jesus with joy, others with caution. Whispers followed them through every village. Stories of miracles, rumours of blasphemy, talk of rebellion and kingship. One evening, as the sun dipped low, they camped beneath a grove of fig trees. The disciples gathered around the fire, the flames flickering against their faces. Thomas broke the silence. "Why Jerusalem?" he asked quietly. "They want you dead there." Jesus stared into the fire, its light reflecting in his eyes. "Because a prophet cannot die outside Jerusalem," he said softly. "It is the city that kills the messengers and stones those sent to it. Yet how I have longed to gather her children together as steam. A hen gathers her chicks beneath her wings, but they would not come." The fire popped. No one spoke after that. The night pressed close around them, thick with the unspoken truth that love was leading him into the heart of danger. When morning came, they rose and walked again. The path climbed slowly, winding toward the hills that guarded the holy city. From a distance, they could already see it. The glint of marble, the gold of the temple catching the sun. Peter's stomach turned at the sight. It was beautiful, but it felt like walking into a storm. Yet beside him, Jesus looked not fearful, but peaceful, as if the very suffering that awaited him was part of something far greater than pain. As they drew nearer, he spoke once more to the crowd that followed behind them. Farmers, widows, merchants, and children trailing in dusty awe. "If anyone would come after me," he said, "let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." The words hung in the air, heavy and holy. Some turned back, shaken. Others walked faster, determined. The road narrowed. The gates of Jerusalem loomed ahead, bright, imposing, waiting. And still, Jesus walked forward, the sound of his sandals against the stone echoing like a heartbeat, steady and sure. Behind him, the disciples followed, uncertain, afraid, yet unwilling to turn away, for something in his stride told them that though suffering waited beyond those walls, so did redemption. The dust of the road still clung to their sandals when they entered the next village, a quiet place nestled between olive groves. Children ran alongside them, laughing, while elders watched from shaded porches. Word of Jesus had travelled faster than his feet. Stories of healing, of bread multiplied, of the blind who now saw. Everywhere he went, people gathered, carrying hope in trembling hands. That evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, they stopped by a small courtyard. A fire crackled in the centre, its glow soft against the stone walls. The people pressed in close, hungry. Not for food this time, but for understanding. The air smelled of smoke and fig leaves. Among them sat the Pharisees, drawn not by faith but by curiosity cloaked in suspicion. They whispered among themselves, watching the tax collectors and sinners sit at his feet. To them, this gathering was scandalous. No rabbi should eat with such people. But Jesus looked around the circle and saw what they could not, the ache behind the laughter, the quiet guilt in the eyes of those who believed they were too far gone to be forgiven. And so, as the night deepened, he began to speak. "There was a man who had 2 sons, he said. The murmurs faded. Even the Pharisees leaned in slightly. The younger said to his father, 'Give me my share of the inheritance.' And so the father divided his wealth between them. Not long after, the younger son gathered all he had and left for a distant country. The people nodded, understanding instantly. They knew this story, the foolish one who leaves, the patient one who stays. But his voice carried something new, something deeper. In that distant land, Jesus continued, the son wasted everything on reckless living. And when a famine came, he found himself starving, feeding pigs to survive. He longed to eat what they ate, but no one gave him anything. A hush fell. Shame was a language everyone there understood. But when he came to his senses, Jesus said, he remembered his father's house, how even the servants there had food to spare. So he said to himself, I will arise and go to my father. I will say, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. The listeners exchanged glances, some shaking their heads, others whispering under their breath. It was unthinkable. No father would take back a son who had thrown away everything. But Jesus' tone softened, and the next words carried the heartbeat of heaven. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The crowd stirred. In their world, fathers did not run. Honor demanded distance. But this father, or this image of God, broke every rule of pride to reach his child. The son began to speak, Jesus continued. Father, I have sinned. But the father would not let him finish. He called to his servants, Bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet. Kill the fatted calf. Let us celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Laughter and tears mingled in the firelight. Even those who had come only to test him sat quietly, their hearts uneasy. But Jesus wasn't finished. His eyes moved toward the Pharisees, who sat stiff and silent. "Meanwhile," he said, "the older son was in the field. When he heard music and dancing, he grew angry. He refused to go in. He paused. The silence stretched. The father came out and pleaded with him, but the older son said, 'All these years I've served you, and you never gave me even a young goat to celebrate with my friends. Yet when this son of yours returns, after wasting your wealth, you kill the fatted calf for him.'" Jesus' gaze lingered on the men who valued law above mercy. The father said, "My son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate, for your brother was dead, and now lives again. He was lost, and is found." The story ended, but the silence that followed spoke louder than any words. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. Faces glowed, some wet with tears, others still hard with pride. Jesus looked at them all, sinners and saints alike. The Bar Mahid. "Father's love," he said quietly, "is not earned. It is given, to the lost, to the broken, to the ones who think they have strayed too far." A breeze stirred the embers, carrying warmth through the crowd. One by one, people bowed their heads, the truth sinking deep. Forgiveness had no limits. And as the fire burned low and the stars emerged, the disciples sat in silence, the story lingering in their hearts. They did not yet know that soon they too would run, would scatter in fear, would feel the sting of guilt and the grace of being found again. But that night, under the glow of the dying fire, they began to understand. Love was not about deserving. It was about returning. Morning came soft and golden over Jerusalem. The streets stirred with the hum of pilgrims arriving for Passover, merchants shouting prices, doves cooing from cages, sandals clattering on stone. The temple loomed above it all, radiant and imposing, its white marble reflecting the sun like a crown. To the people, it was the heart of faith. To Jesus, it had become a stage where devotion and hypocrisy wrestled in plain sight. He entered the outer court with his disciples, moving quietly through the crowd. Priests stood tall in their robes, Pharisees debated near the columns, and the wealthy made a show of their generosity, their coins clinking loudly into the treasury chests, the sound meant to echo, to be heard. Each drop of silver was a performance. The disciples watched, unsure what to make of it. Peter whispered to John, "Look how much they give. Surely that honours God." But Jesus didn't answer immediately. His gaze had fixed on someone else. A woman moving slowly through the crowd, her garments simple, her head bowed. She clutched something in her hand, hidden from view. No one noticed her. Why would they? She didn't draw attention like the others. No servants carried her offering. No coins sparkled in the sun. She was just another shadow in the temple, small and tired, her face lined by years of struggle. When she reached the treasury, she paused, glanced upward, and whispered a prayer no one could hear. Then, from her palm, she dropped 2 small copper coins, the smallest currency in all of Israel. The sound they made was faint, swallowed by the noise of larger offerings around her. But Jesus heard it. He stepped closer, eyes soft, and called to his disciples. "Come," he said, "I tell you the truth. This poor widow has put in more than all the others." Peter frowned, confused. "More, Lord." But the others gave bags of silver. Jesus nodded. "Yes, but they gave out of their abundance, from what they could spare. She, however, gave out of her poverty. She gave all she had to live on." The words settled like dust, quiet but unshakable. The disciples followed his gaze as the woman disappeared into the crowd, unaware that heaven itself had just witnessed her gift. She had not bought God's favour, she had revealed her heart, one that trusted completely. Her offering wasn't measured by weight but by surrender. Jesus stood still for a long time after she was gone. Around him, the temple bustled with motion, the clang of coins, the drone of prayers, the chatter of scholars. Yet he seemed to see something far beyond the walls. His face was calm, but there was sorrow in his eyes, a heaviness that no one else understood. John noticed it first. "Master," he said softly, "why do you look so grieved?" Jesus exhaled slowly. Because they do not see, they build monuments of gold and call it worship, but they forget mercy, justice, faith. They honor God with their lips, but their hearts are far away. He looked toward the inner court, where the elders gathered in small knots, whispering among themselves. He could hear their murmurs, not of prayer, but of plots. Greed disguised as holiness, ambition wrapped in law. Matthew followed his gaze and swallowed hard. They're planning something, he said quietly. Jesus nodded. Yes, the temple that should shelter the faithful has become a marketplace of pride. They devour widows' houses, and for appearance's sake make long prayers. His voice carried no anger, only deep sadness. Their power blinds them to truth, but the Father sees all, even the quiet coin of a widow, even the schemes of a heart. The disciples stood silent. Around them, the great temple seemed suddenly smaller, its grandeur stripped of meaning. The marble shone, but it felt cold, a hollow beauty built on self-interest and fear. Then, as they turned to leave, the afternoon light caught the edges of the offering boxes, and the faint glint of copper shimmered through the gold. Jesus paused once more, his eyes lingering on that small invisible act of faith. "Do you see," he whispered, "how heaven values differently than men? The world sees wealth and applauds, but the Father sees surrender and smiles." They followed him out through the colonnade, past the merchants and guards, past the beggars who stretched their hands toward him in hope. The sound of the temple faded behind them, replaced by the distant bleating of lambs being sold for sacrifice. Peter spoke softly as they walked. "She gave everything, Lord. How can anyone have faith like that?" Jesus glanced at him, a faint smile touching his lips. "You will learn soon enough," he said. "For to follow me is to give not from what you can spare, but from all that you are." The disciples exchanged uneasy glances, still not understanding. Ahead of them, the city stretched under a pale sky, rooftops gleaming, smoke curling upward, a peace that felt fragile. And as they walked toward the Mount of Olives, where the city's shadow lengthened across the earth, the sound of 2 copper coins seemed to echo softly behind them, the quiet proof that faith, though small, is never unseen. Evening fell heavy over Jerusalem. The city glowed faintly beneath. The Passover moon, torches flickering along narrow streets, laughter and psalms drifting from open windows. Families gathered in celebration, but beneath the music and prayer, something unseen stirred, a stillness, as if the air itself held its breath. Jesus and his disciples moved quietly through the alleys, cloaked not in secrecy, but in solemn purpose. The sound of their footsteps echoed softly on the stone. Ahead of them, a small house waited, an upper room prepared, just as he had said it would be. Inside, the table was set simply, bread, wine, and the faint smell of roasted lamb. The disciples took their seats, weary but comforted by the familiar ritual. The room was small, lit by oil lamps that painted gold across the walls. The air was warm with the scent of spiced wine and worn linen. For a moment, it almost felt like any other meal, but beneath the quiet, an unspoken heaviness lingered. Something had shifted since they entered the city. The triumph of palm branches and cheering crowds had given way to whispers, suspicion, and fear, and though no one dared to say it, they could all feel it. Something was coming to an end. Jesus sat among them, his eyes soft but distant, as though he saw both this night and something far beyond it. He looked around the table, at the faces of men who had walked with him through storms, hunger, miracles, and doubt. Friends, brothers, yet one among them carried a shadow in his heart. The meal began. They spoke quietly, recalling memories of the road, the healings, the laughter, the countless faces they'd met. But as the wine passed, the air grew heavier. Jesus took a piece of bread from the table. He held it in his hands for a moment, then looked up. The lamplight caught his face, Dalila's face, and his voice broke the silence. "This is my body," he said, "which is given for you." He tore the bread and handed it to them one by one. The sound of it breaking seemed to echo in the small room, a sound they would remember for the rest of their lives. Then he took the cup. deep red beneath the glow of the oil lamps. "This cup," he said, "is the new covenant in my blood, poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in remembrance of me." His words hung heavy in the air. They did not yet understand what he meant, not fully, but something in his tone made their chests tighten. It sounded like farewell. When the cup came to Judas, he hesitated. His fingers brushed the rim, his eyes darting briefly to Jesus's. For a heartbeat, time stopped. Then Jesus said quietly, "What you are about to do quickly." No one else understood the words. Judas rose slowly, his chair scraping softly against the floor. The door opened, and the night swallowed him whole. The others sat in uneasy silence, glancing between one another. Jesus' face remained calm, but sorrow flickered behind his eyes like the flame of the nearest lamp. He stood, removed his outer robe, and knelt before them, the Isaias, teacher lowering himself before his students. One by one, he washed their feet, the basin's water rippling as he worked in silence. The act shocked them. It was the work of a servant, not a master. When he reached Peter, the fisherman pulled back. "Lord, you will never wash my feet," he said, his voice trembling. Jesus looked up at him gently. "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." Peter hesitated, then nodded, his eyes wet. "Then not just my feet, Lord, my hands and my head as well." Jesus smiled faintly. "You are already clean, only your feet need washing." When he finished, he rose and returned to his seat. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked softly. "You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. But if I, your Lord, have washed your feet, then you also ought to wash one another's. I have given you an example." They nodded, though their minds swirled with confusion and fear. Then he spoke again, his tone heavier. "One of you will betray me." The words hit like a stone dropped into still water. Shock rippled through the room. They looked at one another, each denying it. Peter leaned toward John, who sat beside Jesus, and whispered, "Ask him who he means." John turned, his voice barely above a breath. "Lord, who is it?" Jesus dipped a piece of bread into the dish and handed it to the empty seat where Judas had been. "The one to whom I give this," he said quietly. The meaning was clear, and so was the pain. A long silence followed. The fire crackled. Outside, a cold wind swept through the city streets. Finally, Jesus spoke again, breaking the weight that hung over them. "A new command I give you," he said softly. "Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love each other. By this, everyone will know you are my disciples." The disciples sat still, the words carving themselves into their hearts. The lamps burned low, shadows deepening along the walls. Somewhere beyond the city gates, footsteps echoed in the dark. A man walking quickly, silver coins heavy in his hand. Inside, Jesus looked toward the window, where the night pressed close against the glass. "The hour has come," he whispered. "The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners." The table remained quiet, breadcrumbs scattered, the wine still red in the cup. And as the last flame flickered low, the teacher stood and led them into the night, the quiet hum of the city fading behind them, and betrayal walking silently at their side. The cool night air wrapped around them as they left the upper room. The streets of Jerusalem were quiet now, the laughter and singing of Passover fading behind them. The moon hung pale above the rooftops, casting long shadows that stretched across the path. Jesus walked ahead, his robe brushing the ground, his silence deeper than the night itself. The disciples followed close, whispering nervously among themselves, uncertain of where he was leading them. They crossed the Kidron Valley, where the stream murmured faintly beneath the bridge. On the other side stood a grove of ancient olive trees, gnarled, twisting silhouettes that had stood for generations. This was Gethsemane, the garden where Jesus often came to pray. It was late, but he did not stop to rest. He moved with purpose, though every step seemed weighed down by something unseen. When they reached the grove, he turned to the others. His voice was calm but heavy. "Sit here while I go over there and pray." They obeyed, though their faces betrayed exhaustion. He took Peter, James, and John a little farther into the garden. The night wind rustled the olive branches above them, and for a moment the world felt unbearably still. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow," Jesus said, his voice breaking, even to the point of death. "Stay here and keep watch with me." The three nodded, their eyes wide, but sleep tugged at their bodies. The day had been long, their hearts drained. As they settled on the cold ground, Jesus moved a few steps beyond them, alone. He fell to his knees. The earth was damp beneath him, the scent of olives and dust rising into the air. The weight of what lay ahead pressed down like a mountain. The laughter of the supper still lingered faintly in his mind, the warmth of friendship, the breaking of bread, now replaced by the cold certainty of what was coming. "Father," he whispered, the word trembling in the darkness, "if it be possible, let this cup pass from me." Silence. Only the wind answered, sighing through the branches. He bowed lower, forehead touching the ground. "Nevertheless," he breathed, "not my will, but yours be done." The night deepened around him. His body trembled as agony tore through his spirit. The weight of all sin, every betrayal, every cruelty, every hidden shame began to press upon his soul. His sweat fell heavy to the ground, red as blood. Yet even in the midst of that crushing grief, he prayed. The disciples, just a few paces away, had drifted into sleep. Their breathing was slow, the exhaustion of fear and sorrow finally overtaking them. Jesus rose and walked back to them, the faint light of the moon revealing their slumbering forms. "Could you not keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked softly. His tone wasn't angry, only wounded. "Watch and pray, that you may not fall into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." They stirred, mumbling apologies, promising to stay awake. But as he returned to pray again, fatigue reclaimed them. He fell to his knees once more. "Father," he whispered, voice hoarse now, "if this cup cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." Above him, the stars burned cold and distant. Around him, the world slept. But in heaven, the Father listened, not with indifference, but with love deep enough to let suffering run its course, for the plan could not be undone. The path to redemption led through pain, not around it. When Jesus rose a third time, his face was streaked with sweat and tears, but his eyes were steady. The fear had not vanished, but peace had come, the kind that only surrender brings. He walked back to the disciples again and found them sleeping once more. He looked at them quietly, the corners of his mouth lifting in a faint, almost sorrowful smile. "Sleep now," he murmured, "and take your rest. It is enough." Then he paused, listening. In the distance, the faint sound of footsteps echoed through the still night, steady, deliberate, drawing closer. A flicker of light broke through the trees, then another and another. Torches, weaving between the trunks, their glow like fireflies of judgment. Jesus straightened. The air shifted, the peace of prayer giving way to the gravity of what was about to unfold. The disciples stirred, startled awake by the noise. Peter reached for his cloak, eyes darting toward the approaching lights. "Master," he whispered, "what is it?" Jesus' gaze never wavered. "The hour has come," he said quietly. "The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners." The torches drew nearer, their flames dancing against the darkness. Swords clinked, armor creaked, and the murmurs of soldiers rippled through the trees. Judas led them, his steps quick, his face pale, the silver he'd taken now feeling like chains around his neck. And as he stepped into the clearing, the glow of the fire caught Jesus' face, calm, resolute, illuminated not by fear but by love that refused to turn away. The silence shattered, the torches drew nearer, their light flickering against the bark of the olive trees. The peace that had settled over Gethsemane moments before dissolved into the uneasy rustle of armor and whispered commands. The night was no longer silent. It breathed with tension, with footsteps, with purpose. At the front of the crowd walked Judas. His pace was deliberate, his eyes darting through the shadows until they found him, Jesus, standing calm amid the chaos, the faint glow of the torchlight reflecting in his eyes. Peter moved instinctively, stepping in front of his master. "Lord," he whispered, "shall we strike with the sword?" His hand was already gripping the hilt, knuckles white with panic. Jesus didn't answer immediately. He simply looked past Peter toward Judas. The betrayer's face was pale, drawn tight with guilt and defiance. In his hand, the bag of silver weighed heavier than stone. He hesitated for a breath, then moved forward. "Rabbi," he said softly. His voice cracked on the word. Jesus took a single step closer, the distance between them closing like the final page of a story already written. "Friend," he said quietly, "do what you came to do." Judas swallowed hard. His lips trembled. Then he leaned in and pressed a kiss against Jesus' cheek. The sound was faint, just a whisper of contact, but it echoed like thunder through the grove. Peter's heart surged with fury. Before anyone could stop him, he drew his sword and swung wildly, striking the servant of the high priest. The man cried out as blood spilled across the ground. "Enough!" Jesus' voice broke through the panic, steady and commanding. He reached out and touched the wounded man's ear, and in an instant, the bleeding stopped. The wound vanished. The man staggered back, stunned. Jesus turned to Peter, lowering his arm gently. "Put your sword back in its place," he said. "Those who live by the sword will die by it. Do you think I cannot call upon my Father, and he will at once send 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled?" Peter froze, his weapon falling to his side. His chest heaved, his eyes wide with disbelief. Around them, soldiers began to move in. Cautiously, as though afraid the light itself might strike them down, Jesus lifted his hands, offering no resistance. "Have you come out with swords and clubs, as though I were a criminal?" he asked. "Every day I sat teaching in the temple, and you did not lay hands on me. But this is your hour, and the power of darkness." The soldiers hesitated, caught off guard by the serenity in his voice. Then, following their commander's nod, they stepped forward and seized him. Ropes coiled around his wrists, the rough fibers scraping his skin. The disciples panicked. Fear surged through them like a breaking wave. Some shouted in confusion, others stumbled back, eyes wide in disbelief. They had followed him for years, watched him calm storms and command demons. How could he let himself be taken now? "Master!" Peter cried, reaching out, but a soldier's shield blocked his path. Another grabbed his shoulder, shoving him back. In that instant, instinct took over. The disciples turned and ran, slipping between the trees, their footsteps scattering through the dark. Leaves tore beneath their sandals, their breath quick and uneven. Each one fled into the shadows, the sound of chains and shouting fading behind them. Jesus stood alone now, surrounded by soldiers, the glow of the torches casting harsh light on his calm face. Judas lingered at the edge of the clearing, his breath ragged. For a moment, their eyes met again. "Judas," Jesus said softly, voice heavy with sorrow, "do you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" The words broke him. Judas stumbled back, the weight of what he'd done collapsing upon him like a mountain. But it was too late. The guards pulled Jesus forward, dragging him toward the path that led out of the garden. The olive trees swayed above them, their branches whispering like mourners in the wind. The air that had once carried prayer now carried the metallic scent of betrayal. Peter lingered far behind, hidden among the trees. His hands still shook, the blade slick with the memory of his rage. He wanted to run after them, to fight, to undo it all, but fear rooted him in place. As the torches disappeared into the valley below, he sank to his knees, his chest aching. "Lord," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I swore I would never leave you." The words dissolved into the night. Far ahead, the procession wound through the narrow paths toward Jerusalem. Jesus walked without struggle, his bound hands resting calmly before him. The guards muttered, some mocking, others uneasy. The moon hung high, its light pale against the fire of their torches. At the edge of the city, they passed the outer walls and entered the courtyard of the high priest. Doors opened, shadows swallowed them. The teacher who had spoken of love, who had washed their feet, who had healed the broken, now stood as a prisoner beneath the same temple lights that once reflected the faith of a nation. The kiss had done its work, the silver had been earned, and as the gates closed behind him, the night that began in prayer now sank into the silence of chains. The night air in Jerusalem was cold, sharp enough to sting the lungs. Torches flickered against stone walls as Jesus was led through the narrow alleys, his wrists bound, his face calm yet marked by exhaustion. The soldiers pushed him forward roughly, their armor clinking with each step. Behind them, Peter followed at a distance, keeping to the shadows, his heart pounding in his chest. They reached the high priest's courtyard, where a small fire burned in the center. Servants gathered around it, murmuring softly as they warmed their hands. Above them, in the chamber of Caiaphas, voices rose, sharp, angry, desperate to condemn. Jesus stood before the council. The elders and scribes crowded close, their faces tight with triumph and fear. False witnesses stepped forward, their accusations tumbling over one another, each story more twisted than the last. He said he would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, one shouted. He blasphemes, calling himself the Son of God, another cried. But Jesus said nothing. He stood still, the flicker of torchlight dancing across his face, his silence heavier than any defense. The high priest leaned forward, eyes blazing. Do you not hear what these men testify against you? Still, no answer. Finally, Caiaphas slammed his hand on the table. I adjure you by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Then Jesus lifted his head. His voice was quiet but unwavering. You have said so, but I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. A gasp rippled through the room. Caiaphas tore his robes. Blasphemy, he shouted. He deserves death. The crowd erupted, a storm of voices. Some spat in his face. Others struck him with open hands. Prophesy, Messiah, they mocked. Who hit you this time? Through it all, he stood, silent, blood gathering at the impale, corner of his lip, eyes filled not with anger, but sorrow. Down below, Peter crouched near the fire, his cloak pulled tight. The heat warmed his face, but his heart was frozen in dread. Every shout from the chamber above made him flinch. He wanted to leave, to run, but something kept him there. The same love that once made him swear, I will never forsake you. A servant girl stepped closer, squinting through the dim light. You, she said, pointing, you were with the Galilean. Peter's breath caught. I don't know what you mean. His voice shook, his eyes darting toward the gate. She frowned, but said nothing. Moments later, another servant recognized him. You are one of his followers, he said, louder this time. Your accent gives you away. I swear I am not, Peter snapped too quickly. His words came out like fire, burning even as he spoke them. Silence fell for a moment, until a third man stepped forward, his face lit by the flames. I saw you in the garden with him, he said firmly. You were there. The courtyard seemed to close in. Fear clawed at Peter's throat. I do not know the man, he shouted, his voice breaking. And then, from somewhere beyond the walls, came the sound, the sharp, aching cry of a rooster splitting the night. Peter froze. The world around him seemed to vanish. The memory hit like lightning. Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. His knees buckled. He stumbled back from the fire, the heat replaced by a cold that reached his soul. Tears blurred his vision as he fled into the dark, the echo of the rooster still ringing in his ears. Somewhere in the courtyard above, Jesus turned his head. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. No accusation, no anger, only heartbreak. Peter fell to the ground outside the city walls, sobbing into his hands. Lord, forgive me. The words barely left his lips before they dissolved into the dust. Inside, the mockery continued. The guards blindfolded him, striking his face again and again. Prophesy, they taunted. Tell us who struck you. The dawn began to bleed across the horizon, pale and cold. The priests convened once more, binding him tighter. They led him from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's hall, to Pilate. The people, stirred by whispers and bribed voices, began to gather. Pilate stood on the balcony, watching the crowd. What accusation do you bring against this man? He asked. He claims to be a king, they shouted. He stirs rebellion. Pilate's brow furrowed. He turned to Jesus, studying him carefully. Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus met his gaze. You say that I am. Pilate exhaled slowly. I find no fault in him. But the crowd roared louder. Crucify him! The sound rose like a tide, swallowing reason, mercy, and truth. Pilate's hands tightened on the railing as he looked down at the man before him, calm, wounded, silent. And though he washed his hands in water, he could not cleanse himself of what was to come. Outside the city, Peter wandered alone, the sunrise burning gold across the horizon, the same sun that would soon light the hill of Calvary. The morning rose heavy with dust and judgment. The courtyard was alive with the roar of a restless crowd, voices colliding, echoing off the stone walls. Pilate stood before them, his hands still damp from the basin, but his conscience no cleaner. Before him stood Jesus, his body torn from the scourging, his face streaked with blood and sweat. The purple cloak draped mockingly across his shoulders clung to open wounds. A crown of thorns pressed deep into his brow, crimson threading down his temples. "Behold the man!" Pilate shouted, his voice strained, but the crowd only roared louder. "Crucify him!" Pilate hesitated, the weight of politics and fear settling on his shoulders. He had found no fault, but truth had no place in this kind of noise. The priest stirred the people with careful words, reminding them of loyalty to Caesar, of blasphemy against their laws. The air was thick with frenzy, and Pilate gave in to it. "Take him," he said, his voice hollow. "Do with him as you will." And so they led him away. The soldiers stripped the cloak from his back, the fabric tearing at the wounds beneath. They laid a heavy beam across his shoulders, the cross rough and splintered, soaked with the scent of old wood and death. The weight bent him forward. The crowd jeered as he stumbled through the streets, the road to Golgotha stretching before him like a scar. People lined the path, some spitting, others shouting curses, yet among them were those who wept quietly, faces hidden beneath veils. Mothers clutched their children close, unable to look for long. At one point, he fell. The cross crashed to the ground, the sound cracking through the air like thunder. A soldier barked a command and seized a man from the crowd, Simon of Serene, a traveller. They forced him to carry the beam beside Jesus. Simon's hands trembled as he took the weight, glancing at the blood that streaked the wood. Jesus turned his head slightly, their eyes meeting for a brief moment, a silent exchange of exhaustion and mercy. No words passed between them, yet something eternal did. When they reached the hill called Golgotha, the place of the skull, the crowd pressed closer. The soldiers worked quickly, their cruelty efficient. They laid him down upon the wood, stretching his arms wide. The hammer rose once, twice, and the nails drove through flesh into oak, the sound echoing across the barren hill. The pain was beyond words, yet no curse left his lips. Only a whisper, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." The cross was lifted, its base dropped into the earth with a dull thud. The sky above began to shift, clouds gathering, dimming the sun's warmth. They nailed a sign above his head, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." The words were meant as mockery, yet they rang with truth. Two others hung beside him, thieves condemned to die. One sneered, gasping between breaths, "If you are the Christ, save yourself, and us." But the other turned his head weakly, his voice trembling. "Do you not fear God? We are punished justly, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then, looking toward Jesus, he whispered, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus met his gaze, his eyes soft despite the agony. "Truly I tell you," he said, "today you will be with me in paradise." Below the cross, soldiers gambled for his garments, laughing. The priests watched with satisfaction, their fear hidden behind smirks. The women stood farther back. Mary, his mother, her veil damp with tears. John beside her, silent and pale. When Jesus saw them, he spoke again, his voice faint but tender. "Woman, behold your son." Then to John, "Behold your mother." Lightning flickered across the sky, the wind grew colder, darkness began to creep over the land. Not the kind that comes with sunset, but something heavier, unnatural. The sun itself seemed to hide its face. Hours passed, the pain deepened. Each breath came shorter, laboured, as though the weight of the world itself pressed down upon his chest. The crowd grew quieter now, their jeers fading into uneasy murmurs as the heavens dimmed. Finally, he lifted his eyes toward the clouded sky and cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The words tore through the air, not in despair, but in the rawness of bearing every sin, every grief, every silence between heaven and earth. Then, after a long moment, his body sagged, his voice softened. "It is finished." He drew one last breath, slow, trembling, eternal. "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And then he was still. The ground trembled beneath their feet. The earth itself groaned. The temple veil, thick as woven stone, tore from top to bottom. Stones cracked, graves opened, the wind howled. The soldiers fell back in terror. One of them, the centurion, stared up at him, eyes wide. "Surely," he whispered, "this was the Son of God." The darkness deepened, wrapping the world in silence. The crowd began to disperse. Their voices hushed, their hearts unsure, and as the wind died and the dust settled, the body of the Saviour hung limp upon the wood. His head bowed, his eyes closed, and the world itself held its breath. The wind over Golgotha had stilled. The crowd that once screamed for blood was gone, their voices swallowed by the same silence that now hung over the hill. The crosses stood like broken trees against the grey horizon, their purpose fulfilled, their horror complete. Only the whisper of the wind remained, a mournful sound, carrying the scent of iron and earth. At the foot of the cross, a small group lingered, the women who had followed him from Galilee. Mary, his mother, sat in the dust, her hands trembling as she reached toward the wooden beam. Her grief was too deep for sound. Beside her stood John, silent, his face streaked with tears and disbelief. They had heard his last breath, seen the soldier's spear pierce his side, watched the sky grow dark, as if the world itself could not bear to witness the death of its maker. When Joseph of Arimathea arrived, a man of wealth, quiet faith, and courage newly born, he went to Pilate and asked for the body. The governor granted it reluctantly, eager to wash his hands of this blood. Nicodemus joined Joseph, bringing spices, myrrh and aloes, in a gesture both tender and desperate. Together they lowered the body from the cross, wrapping it carefully in linen and tears. The sun was already setting. The Sabbath was near. There was no time for the rituals of mourning, no time for words or proper ceremony. The two men carried him to a nearby tomb, new, untainted, carved into solid rock. They laid him inside, the weight of his stillness heavier than the stone itself. Mary watched from a distance, her shawl drawn tightly around her face. She did not speak. No one did. The soldiers rolled the great stone across the entrance with a dull, final sound that echoed in their chests. And just like that, the light of the world was locked away in darkness. The disciples fled that night. Fear clung to them like a second skin. They gathered in a small shuttered room, the doors barred from within. No one dared light a fire. Their whispers were short, their eyes hollow. The teacher who had calmed storms, who had called the dead to life, he was gone. Peter sat in the corner, head buried in his hands. He hadn't spoken since the rooster crowed. Every sound outside made him flinch. The weight of his denial crushed him more deeply than any chain. John tried to pray, but the words tangled in his throat. Thomas stared at the wall, muttering that none of it made sense. The silence of the tomb reached them even there. Outside, Jerusalem was quiet. The festival that had filled its streets with singing and feasting now felt like an empty performance. The same people who had shouted "Hosanna" days before walked home early, uneasy. The temple priests pretended satisfaction, but even they felt the unease that comes when something greater than law has been disturbed. And then came the Sabbath. The world rested, the sky hung low and grey, heavy with waiting. No miracles, no voices, no signs, only stillness. The earth seemed to hold its breath, as if creation itself was mourning its creator. The olive trees in Gethsemane swayed gently, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. Even the birds fell silent. Mary, mother of Jesus, sat in a dark room with the other women. Her eyes were dry now, grief beyond tears. Her hands moved unconsciously over the shawl in her lap, the same one she had wrapped him in when he was born, the beginning and the end, both cradled in linen. Outside the city walls, the tomb lay still beneath the watch of Roman guards. The seal of Caesar marked the stone, a fragile attempt to hold back heaven. Inside, darkness reigned, yet not the kind that wins. The air itself seemed to tremble, as though waiting for something it couldn't explain. The disciples spent the long hours in hiding, haunted by questions. Had they misunderstood everything? Was the kingdom? He spoke of only a dream. Each remembered his words differently, fragments of hope scattered across their memories. On the third day, Peter muttered it once under his breath, but no one answered. It was too painful to hope. Night came again, slow and endless. The city slept beneath a veil of sorrow. The stars hung distant and dim, as if even they mourned. The stone at the tomb entrance sat unmoved, the guards pacing in weary silence, unaware that the ground beneath their feet held not defeat, but the seed of victory. In the quiet of that tomb, in the darkness that seemed absolute, the body of the Saviour rested. The wounds that marked his hands and side lay still, but heaven itself watched over that silence, counting the moments, and while men despaired and demons rejoiced, creation waited. The stillness was not death's triumph, but the breath before awakening. The world mourned, yes, but heaven was not done speaking, because even in the heart of the tomb where silence reigned and hope lay buried, dawn was already preparing to break. The third day dawned in quiet mystery. The sky was pale and tender, the colour of ash giving way to rose. The city still slept, unaware that the weight of history was about to shift. The hill of Golgotha stood dark against the horizon, and beyond it, in a garden where olive branches trembled with dew, the stone that sealed the tomb of Jesus glistened faintly in the first light. Mary Magdalene walked the path alone. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of myrrh and wet soil. Her hands clutched the jar of spices. One last act of devotion, one final attempt to honour the body of the only man who had ever truly seen her. She had watched him die. She had watched them bury him. And now, though the thought tore at her, she came to face what she could not let go of. As she neared the tomb, something caught her eye. The ground was disturbed, footprints in the dust, the faint scuff marks of movement. Then she saw it. The stone, massive, immovable, was no longer in place. It had been rolled away. Her breath caught. For a heartbeat, she could not move. The jar slipped from her trembling hands, shattering against the stones. Panic surged in her chest. "They've taken him," she whispered. "They've taken my Lord." She turned and ran, the hem of her cloak brushing the grass. Her sandals slapped the path as she raced toward the city. She found Peter and John in the narrow streets, their faces hollow from days of fear and sleeplessness. "The tomb!" she gasped. "It's open! His body is gone!" Without a word, they ran. John reached the tomb first, but hesitated at the entrance, his heart pounding in his chest. Peter rushed past him and went inside. The light of morning spilled across the stone floor, revealing the linen cloths lying neatly where the body had been. The head covering, folded carefully apart from the rest, rested as if untouched by human hands. No struggle, no theft, only silence and order, as if death itself had stepped aside. John entered then, his breath shaky. His eyes took in every detail, every impossibility, and in that moment, faith cracked open inside him, like dawn breaking through the horizon. He didn't yet understand, but something in him knew. The two men left, overwhelmed, half believing, half afraid. But Mary stayed. She stood outside the tomb, her sobs breaking the stillness. The emptiness before her was too much to bear. She leaned against the entrance, tears blurring her vision. Then, through the blur, she saw something. Two figures seated where the body had been, clothed in light. "Woman," one of them asked gently, "why are you weeping?" "They have taken my Lord," she choked out, "and I don't know where they've laid him." When she turned back toward the garden, she saw another figure standing in the half-light. She didn't recognize him. Her grief was too deep, her eyes too clouded. She thought he was the gardener. "Woman," the man said softly, "why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" "Sir," she said, her voice trembling, "if you have carried him away, tell me where you've laid him, and I will take him." Then he spoke her name. Mary. Everything stopped. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. She turned, the word catching in her throat. "Rabboni, teacher." Her tears turned to laughter as she fell to her knees. It was him, alive, real. The same voice that had once called her out of darkness now stood before her, radiant with life. Jesus looked down at her, his expression filled with gentle joy. "Do not hold on to me," he said softly, "for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Her hands shook as she rose. She could hardly breathe. The spices she had brought for his burial were forgotten at her feet. She ran again, but this time not in grief. Her feet seemed to barely touch the earth. The garden shimmered with light, the dew glowing like tiny embers of heaven. The city was just beginning to wake as she burst through the streets, her voice echoing against the walls. "I have seen the Lord," she cried. "He is alive." The words sounded impossible, yet they carried the power of truth itself. In that single morning, everything changed. Death had lost its hold. The tomb, once a symbol of finality, had become the birthplace of eternity. Back in the upper room, the disciples would soon hear the knock, hesitant, urgent, and the voice they thought silenced forever. They would see the scars, touch the hands, and feel the peace that came not from safety, but from victory. But for now, in the quiet garden, where a stone lay rolled away, Mary stood in the rising light, her tears drying in the warmth of dawn. The birds began to sing again, the earth exhaled, and the world, weary, wounded, waiting, began to wake with her. Because resurrection had come, and nothing would ever be the same again. The news of the empty tomb spread like fire through dry grass. But not everyone could believe it. Some called it hope. Others called it madness. The disciples, still huddled behind locked doors, struggled to make sense of what Mary had said. "I have seen the Lord." Could it be real? Could death itself have yielded to life? Outside Jerusalem, the day had grown warm. Two travellers made their way along the dusty road leading to the small village of Emmaus, about 7 miles away. Their steps were slow, their conversation heavy with grief. Cleopas, one of them, kept glancing at the road ahead, as if hoping the world might make sense again if he just kept walking. Beside him, his companion shook his head, muttering under his breath. "We thought he was the one," the man said quietly. "The one who would redeem Israel. But now..." His words trailed off into the wind. The silence between them said everything. Disappointment, confusion, heartbreak. As they walked, a third traveller joined them. A stranger who seemed to appear from nowhere. His clothes were simple, his face calm, his stride unhurried. He matched their pace easily. "What are you discussing as you walk along?" the stranger asked. They stopped. Cleopas turned toward him, disbelief flashing across his face. "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that have happened these last few days?" The man smiled faintly. "What things?" "The things concerning Jesus of Nazareth," Cleopas said, his voice breaking. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests handed him over to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. We had hoped he was the one who would redeem Israel. And now, it's the 3rd day since these things happened. Some women from our group amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning and didn't find his body. They said they saw angels who told them he was alive, but when others went to look, they found nothing. The stranger listened quietly, nodding, his eyes kind but knowing. Then he spoke, his voice low but steady. O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and then enter his glory? They looked at him, startled. His words carried authority, not accusation, but illumination, as though each syllable breathed warmth into their cold confusion. And then he began to explain. From Moses to the prophets, he unfolded the scriptures to them, stories they'd known since childhood but never truly understood. He spoke of the Passover lamb, of Isaiah's suffering servant, of David's promised heir whose kingdom would never end. Each passage, each prophecy, wove together into a single thread, leading to the cross, and beyond it, to victory. The road wound through olive groves and open fields, the air rich with the scent of spring. The sun began to sink behind the hills, painting the world in gold and amber. Still, the stranger's words flowed like living water. With every step, something began to stir within them, a flicker of understanding, of wonder. When they reached the outskirts of Emmaus, the man made as if to continue on, but Cleopas touched his arm. "Stay with us," he said urgently. "It's nearly evening, the day is almost over." The stranger nodded. Together they entered a small home, where a single oil lamp cast soft light upon the table. Bread lay ready, the air fragrant with its warmth. They sat down together. The stranger reached for the loaf. His hands moved with familiar grace, breaking, blessing, giving, and in that instant their eyes were opened. The gesture, the blessing, the tone, they knew it. The veil fell away, and before them stood not a stranger, but the risen Lord. "Jesus," Cleopas whispered, his voice trembling. Their hearts leapt with recognition. The room seemed to blaze with light, not from the lamp, but from the presence of the one they thought lost forever. But as they reached toward him, he was gone. The chair sat empty, the bread lay broken upon the table. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Their chests heaved, their hands shaking. Then the other man whispered, his voice trembling with awe, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened the scriptures to us?" Cleopas nodded, tears filling his eyes. "He's alive," he breathed. "He lives." Without another word, they rose from the table, nearly knocking over the lamp in their haste. The night was cold, but their hearts burned like fire. They ran back toward Jerusalem, their sandals pounding the earth, the stars above them bright and clear. 7 miles of darkness could not dim what they carried now. Not fear, not fatigue, not the memory of death. They carried truth, radiant and unstoppable. By the time they reached the city, their breath ragged and their clothes dusted with the road, the disciples were still huddled behind locked doors. Cleopas pounded on the wood. When it opened, his voice broke into the room like light-shattering shadow. "We have seen him," he cried. "The Lord, he walked with us. He broke bread with us." And though disbelief still hung heavy in that room, hope began to stir, fragile, luminous, unstoppable, because now they knew the grave was empty, and the road to despair had become the road to revelation. The room was thick with whispers when Cleopas and his companion finished their story. Breathless from their 7-mile sprint, their words tumbled out between gasps. The walk, the stranger, the scripture, the breaking of bread. The disciples listened, wide-eyed, torn between disbelief and desperate hope. Some clung to the possibility. Others shook their heads in quiet fear that their grief had birthed delusion. Then, without warning, the air changed. A stillness swept over them, heavy and holy. The lamp flames flickered, though no wind passed through the barred windows. And there, standing in their midst, was Jesus. No sound announced him, no door creaked open. He simply was, alive, radiant, familiar. "Peace be with you," he said. The words were like sunlight breaking through a storm. Some fell to their knees, others stepped back, their hearts caught between awe and terror. "It's a spirit," someone whispered. He raised his hands, scarred, unmistakable. "Why are you troubled? Why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. A spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see I have." They stared, trembling. The marks of the nails still glimmered in the lamplight, not as wounds, but as proof, holy scars of love that had conquered death. Then he smiled. "Have you anything to eat?" Someone hurriedly handed him a piece of broiled fish. He ate before them, calmly, simply, the most human act made divine. The tension broke. Laughter and tears mingled in the same breath. Their fear began to melt, replaced by wonder. But Thomas wasn't there. When he returned later that night, the room was alive with noise and trembling joy. Everyone spoke at once, voices overlapping like waves. "We've seen him! He's alive! He was right here! We touched him!" Thomas stood frozen in the doorway, his jaw tightening. He looked around the room, the same faces he had known for years. Many trusted, yet their joy seemed too wild, too fragile to be real. "You saw him?" he said slowly. "With your eyes?" "Yes," John said, stepping forward. "He stood here. We saw the wounds, Thomas." Thomas's eyes darkened. "No, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, and my hand into his side, I will not believe." The room fell quiet. No one argued. No one condemned him. They simply let the silence stand. For the next 8 days, Thomas lived inside that tension, surrounded by believers, yet bound by his own doubt. He prayed, but heaven seemed mute. He watched the others laugh, sing, and whisper about miracles, and every smile cut him like a blade. He had loved Jesus deeply. He had left everything to follow him, but love had turned to loss, and loss had hardened into disbelief. To hope again felt dangerous. Then, on the 8th day, the disciples gathered once more. The doors were locked. The memory of fear still haunted them, though joy had dulled its edge. Thomas lingered near the back, his hands folded, his mind restless. And suddenly, as before, he was there. Jesus stood among them, his presence filling the room like breath after drowning. The same warmth, the same calm authority. "Peace be with you." Every eye turned to him, but his gaze found one man. "Thomas!" Thomas froze. His heart slammed against his ribs. Jesus stepped closer, his voice gentle, not rebuke, but invitation. "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and place it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." For a long moment, Thomas couldn't move. The room vanished, the walls, the others, the world itself, until there was only him, the scars, radiant in the soft light, the eyes that had once looked at him with love across the Sea of Galilee. Slowly, he fell to his knees. Tears burned down his face as he whispered the only words that could escape him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus smiled, a smile filled with eternity. "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." The words sank deep, planting faith where logic had failed. Thomas bowed lower, the weight of grace overwhelming him. It was not proof that saved him, but mercy, the love that met him right where his doubt had lived. When Jesus vanished once more, the room pulsed with quiet awe. No one spoke for a long time. Thomas remained kneeling, his tears pooling in the dust. At last, Peter placed a hand on his shoulder. "You believed," he said softly. Thomas nodded, his voice a whisper, "because he still came, even for me." Outside, the night was still. The stars glimmered over the rooftops, their light steady and strong. Inside, hearts that once feared the dark now burned like lanterns. They would not stay hidden much longer. The fear that once caged them had turned to purpose. Jesus had risen, and now his words echoed in their hearts. "Go into all the world." And so, as the dawn began to press against the horizon once more, the disciples knew their mission was no longer to wait, but to move, to carry light into the places still shadowed by unbelief, to proclaim what Thomas himself now knew, with unshakable certainty: the Lord lives, and his grace reaches even the doubter's heart. The morning mist clung low over the water, soft and grey. The Sea of Galilee stretched wide and silent, the surface smooth except for the ripples from a small boat drifting near the shallows. The disciples were there again, Peter, John, Thomas, Nathanael, and a few others. their hands rough with rope and salt. Old habits had brought them back to what they once knew. The world had shifted beyond understanding. Death had been undone, and yet life still demanded something familiar. So they fished, not because they hoped to catch much, but because the quiet rhythm of casting and pulling was all they understood anymore. All night they worked. Cast, wait, haul, nothing. The nets came up empty each time, their efforts swallowed by the dark. The air was cool and damp, the silence broken only by the creak of wood and the soft slap of waves against the hull. Peter leaned on the edge of the boat, staring into the water. Every ripple seemed to carry memories of the day Jesus had first called him, of walking on these very waters, of sinking, of being lifted. He could almost hear that same voice again. Follow me. Then, as the first light began to spill over the horizon, a figure appeared on the distant shore. The man stood near a small fire, smoke curling lazily into the dawn. His voice carried across the water. "Friends," he called, "have you caught any fish?" Peter looked up, squinting into the morning glare. "No," he shouted back. "Throw your net on the right side of the boat," the man said, "and you will find some." It was such an ordinary suggestion, and yet something about it stirred memory, something ancient and alive. Without a word, they obeyed. The net hit the water with a heavy splash, sank, and within seconds it strained against their grip. The ropes pulled tight, the weight overwhelming. Fish thrashed beneath the surface, though, the water alive with silver. John's breath caught, his heart knew before his mind did. "It's the Lord," he cried. Before anyone could stop him, Peter threw on his cloak and leapt into the water. The cold hit him like a rush of truth. He swam hard, the sea closing around him, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The closer he came, the clearer he saw, the glow of the fire, the figure standing beside it, the calm familiarity of presence. When Peter reached the shore, dripping and gasping, Jesus was there, just as he had been before the cross, yet somehow different, eternal. His eyes were warm with quiet joy. A small fire crackled beside him, built of driftwood and patience. On it, fish sizzled, the smell of breakfast mingling with the salt air. Beside it lay bread, fresh and waiting. "Bring some of the fish you've just caught," Jesus said. Peter turned, still catching his breath, as the others arrived, dragging the net heavy with abundance. 153 large fish, John would later remember, though somehow the net had not torn. They gathered around the fire, the warmth licking at their chilled hands. The light of dawn broke fully now, painting the sea gold. "Come and eat," Jesus said simply. No one dared ask who he was. They knew. They sat together, the crackle of the fire filling the silence, the taste of bread and fish grounding them in something both ordinary and holy. It was Peter who felt the tension most, the unspoken ache of denial still burning within him. He had sworn loyalty, and then fear had shattered it. 3 denials, 3 wounds that no apology could erase. After the meal, Jesus turned to him. "Simon, son of John," he said gently, "do you love me more than these?" Peter froze. His eyes fell to the sand. "Yes, Lord," he said quietly. "You know that I love you. Feed my lambs." Jesus paused, then asked again, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter swallowed hard. "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Take care of my sheep." And then, a third time, the echo of every denial. "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter's eyes filled. "Lord," he whispered, "you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus smiled, not in accusation, but in restoration. "Feed my sheep." The words were more than forgiveness. They were calling. Peter's shame dissolved in the warmth of that fire, replaced by a quiet purpose. The man who once ran from the cross would now walk toward it for others. The sea breeze lifted, and for the first time in weeks he felt free. The others listened, hearts heavy with awe and comfort. The fire popped softly, sending sparks into the wind. The waves murmured against the shore, steady and eternal. When the meal was done, Jesus stood and looked out over the sea. "Follow me," he said once more. The same invitation that had begun everything, now reborn in light instead of shadow. Peter rose, water still dripping from his cloak, and followed him. Behind them, the fire burned low, not dying, but glowing with that steady warmth that lingers after the storm. It would become their memory, their symbol, the shore fire, the place where grief met grace, where failure became faith, and where the weary found rest once again. And though the waves would one day rise, though the path ahead would demand courage beyond measure, they would always remember that morning, the smoke, the bread, the voice that called them friends. The warmth of that fire would burn in their hearts forever, a quiet reminder that redemption is not a thunderclap, but a whisper beside the sea. The embers of the shore fire still glowed faintly when Jesus led them away from the sea. The scent of smoke clung to their clothes. The sound of waves followed like a heartbeat. They did not know this was their last morning with him, in such quiet company. But something in the air felt different, lighter, rising, like the wind before dawn. They walked together toward the hills, sunlight warming their backs. The world seemed alive again. Every tree, every gust of wind, every cry of a distant gull. Death had lost its grip on creation. Life hummed beneath every breath. Peter walked beside him, no longer haunted by guilt, but shaped by grace. John followed, eyes bright, his mind still caught on every word spoken beside the fire. Thomas carried no more doubt, only wonder. Each of them had been remade, not perfect, not fearless, but ready. When they reached the mountain where he had first taught them to pray, they stopped. The same ground that once echoed with his words, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," now held a different kind of silence, the kind that comes before parting. Jesus turned to them, his face calm, radiant beneath the morning sun. "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me," he said. His voice was both gentle and thunderous, filling the space around them. "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit." The words struck them not as a command, but as a heartbeat, a calling that would echo through generations. "Teach them to observe all that I have commanded you," he continued, "and behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." They stood in silence, each man breathing in the weight and wonder of what he had said. The task was impossible by human strength, the world vast, their numbers few. And yet there was no fear. The same spirit that raised him would soon dwell within them. Jesus stepped closer, looking into their faces. Fishermen, tax collectors, once doubters and dreamers, now messengers of eternity. His gaze lingered on each one, as if engraving their names upon his heart. "Do not be afraid," he said softly. "Wait in Jerusalem until you are clothed with power from on high." The promise hung in the air, shimmering like heat on stone. They didn't yet understand what he meant, only that it was enough. He had never failed them, and he would not start now. The breeze shifted, the sky brightened, the light sharpening to gold. Jesus lifted his hands, the same hands that had broken bread, washed feet, healed the blind, calmed the storm, and blessed them. As he spoke, the world seemed to bend toward heaven. The earth beneath their feet felt lighter, the air thicker with light. Slowly, gently, he began to rise. Their eyes widened, their breath caught in their throats. The light grew stronger, wrapping around him like fire made of peace. His voice still echoed as he ascended, "I am with you, always." Then a cloud enveloped him, and he was gone from sight. They stood there, staring upward, the wind pressing softly against their faces, their hearts torn between awe and longing. For a moment, no one moved. The mountain held its breath. Then 2 figures in white, ill, appeared beside them, their presence calm and bright as dawn. "Men of Galilee," one said, "why do you stand looking into the sky wall? This same Jesus, who has been taken up from you into heaven, will come again in the same way you saw him go." The words settled over them like a seal. Hope, not an end, but a beginning. Slowly they lowered their gaze. The clouds still glowed faintly, but the figure they loved was gone. Yet strangely, the loss no longer felt like absence. The air itself seemed charged with his presence, as though every breath carried his nearness. Peter turned first, his jaw set, his eyes clear. "We know what we must do," he said quietly, and so they descended the mountain, not as men broken by grief, but as bearers of light. Each step carried purpose. Each heartbeat pulsed with fire. The fear that once chained them had been burned away, replaced by something stronger than certainty: trust. When they reached the plain below, the world spread out before them, the villages, the distant cities, the endless horizon. Somewhere out there were souls who did not yet know his name, hearts that still trembled in the dark. And they would go, through storms and prisons, through deserts and kings' courts, through laughter and blood. They would go because he had told them to, because love compelled them, because the spirit within them would not be silent. The memory of the shore fire still warmed them, the crackle of flame, the sound of his voice saying, "Feed my sheep." That same warmth now spread in their chests, no longer bound to one place or moment. It was the fire of purpose, quiet but unquenchable, the kind that lights the hearts of those who have seen the impossible and still choose to go. And though the sea faded behind them, its rhythm remained, a steady reminder that he who called them from the water now sent them to the world. They did not look back, for the same Jesus who once broke bread beside the waves now burned within them, leading them onward, to Judea, to Samaria, to the ends of the earth, until every heart would know what they had seen, the risen Lord, and the everlasting flame of his love. The waves still sound the same, after all the journeys, the storms, the miracles, and the partings. The sea remains unchanged, breathing in and out, patient as eternity. The shore waits as it always has, its sands cool beneath the fading light. Somewhere in the distance, a small fire crackles, gentle, steady, familiar. You walk closer. The breeze carries the scent of salt and smoke, mingling with something warm, almost sweet. The faint smell of bread toasting on the embers. The rhythm of the tide hums like a heartbeat, and the sky is painted in slow strokes of gold and violet. The world feels quieter here, softer. You've heard the story now, every joy, every tear, every miracle that shaped it. You've walked beside the fisherman, felt the dust of the roads, stood beneath the shadow of the cross, and glimpsed the light of the empty tomb. You've seen faith break, then heal again. You've seen love die and rise. But tonight, the story comes home. The fire by the shore glows brighter as you draw near. The same place where he once stood, where he called his friends children, where forgiveness was served beside fish and bread. It waits for you too. The sand remembers. The sea still whispers his name. You sit down before the fire, feeling its warmth wrap around you. The world behind you fades. The noise, the worry, the unfinished things. Only the ocean remains, breathing calm. Then you hear it. That voice, not thunder, not command. A whisper, low and kind, curling through the smoke. Rest, little one. It's the same voice that calmed storms, that called Peter from the waves, that spoke life into tombs and peace into chaos. It speaks your name like a promise. Rest, you are never alone. Your shoulders ease. The weight you didn't know you were still carrying begins to slip away. Every failure you feared, every guilt you've hidden, every doubt that's clung too tightly, they loosen in the warmth of that voice. The sea shimmers in the firelight, each ripple catching a star's reflection. You can almost see the faces of those who came before, fishermen mending nets, Mary's tearful joy, Thomas's trembling faith, Peter's redemption by the flame. All of them gathered in the same light, all of them held by the same mercy. You realize then that this story, his story, never really ended. It only widened, reaching out through time until it found you here. He is still calling by the shore, still breaking bread, still speaking peace. The wind shifts, brushing your hair gently. The fire pops, sending a spark into the air, and for a moment, it's as if everything, Heaven and earth, water and flame, exhales together. You close your eyes. The warmth soaks through your skin, into your bones, into the deepest places you've kept guarded. The whisper comes again, softer this time, like a lullaby carried by the tide. You've done enough for now. Let go. Be still. The firelight flickers against your face, and in its glow the world feels both infinite and small. You remember the lessons, the obedience of fishermen, the courage of the faithful, the forgiveness of the fallen. Each story, each flame, each moment leading back here, to this, not an ending, but a rest. You breathe in the scent of salt and wood smoke, the sound of gentle waves folding against the sand. Somewhere beyond sight, the dawn is already waiting, but you're in no hurry to meet it. This moment is enough. The same presence that walked the water now sits beside you. You can almost feel it, the closeness, the steady peace. Rest, little one, he whispers again. You are loved, you are seen, you are mine. The fire hums low, steady, eternal. The waves roll and return, like a heartbeat in rhythm with his words. You look up at the stars, and somehow you know. This story isn't finished. It never will be. It lives on in every act of kindness, every quiet prayer, every trembling step of faith. The same spirit that once set the disciples' hearts ablaze now burns quietly in yours. You draw your knees closer, watching the last embers glow deep orange, fading slowly to ash. The sea sings softly, endless and familiar. The voice lingers, not as sound, but as peace. Rest now, it says, as the night folds gently around you. You are never alone. And as the final spark dims into the sand, you understand, the flame has not died. It has only moved inside you, where it will burn forever.